Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the September 9 work session of the Ann Arbor City Council, where we will be hearing from our friends at SEMCOG, as well as a solid waste updates with respect to the Solid Waste Resources Management Plan. Mr. Lazarus, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to have our representatives from SEMCOG go first. So I'll turn the floor over, and then I'm going to sneak around the other side.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Thanks for having us here. My name is Amy Malmer. I'm the membership manager at SEMCOG, and with me is Trevor Bryden. He's a transportation planner. We're going to give you a brief presentation tonight. Our executive director, Kathleen Lamaco, sends her regrets, but we do have a video thanking you for recently renewing your membership. It's 90 seconds, so I'm going to start with that, and then we'll get right into our presentation.
Thanks for renewing your membership in SEMCOG. Because of you, we're able to leverage data, planning, and collaboration into important initiatives that benefit the entire 7-county Southeast Michigan region. Let us share a few of them with you.
We collect and analyze data and then bring it to life through visualization and interactive maps like the Regional Forecast Explorer, which provides dynamic access to population and development trends. We work with local governments to implement our plans, offering assistance with on-the-ground solutions. We project and plan for the future of our transportation system, prioritizing mobility solutions that drive our economy, safely connect people and places, and protect the environment. We advance the region's economic development strategy in partnership with stakeholders from the public and private sectors. We help to coordinate and promote opportunities for fun and adventure through Southeast Michigan Park Finder, featuring Trail Explorer. We bring together local governments and provide a voice for the region, advocating on key issues in Lansing and Washington.
This is just a taste of what SEMCOG does with your support. None of this would be possible without participation like yours. Thank you for renewing your membership. We look forward to your active participation in working together to improve your community and our region.
All right, so we'll go into just a little more detail on those things. Yes, help getting to PowerPoint, please. Thank you. You can use that or the mouse. Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. Tonight, we're going to just provide a brief overview of our organization, our recent planning activities in the areas of transportation, environment, and community and economic development, and our efforts to implement our plans here in Ann Arbor. As you may know, we serve 7 counties of Southeast Michigan. Current SEMCOG members are shaded on the map. All 7 counties are members, as are most of the intermediate school districts and community colleges, including those institutions here in Washtenaw County. Our funding is provided by member dues, which we use to match federal and state grants that pay for data acquisition and analysis, planning, and technical assistance to improve our region and to support implementation of local plans. Each member community votes to join SEMCOG, pays membership dues, and appoints delegates and alternates to SEMCOG's General Assembly, which is our full membership committee. Ann Arbor's delegate is Councilmember Nelson, and her alternate is Councilmember Smith. These are the people who vote on behalf of the city and are our key contact people. Membership at SEMCOG is organizational, so you are all welcome to attend and participate in our meetings, attend workshops, and contact our staff for data or information that you may need from us. You all should be receiving our biweekly newsletter called Regional Update, which is a pretty quick way to keep notified of our meetings, our activities, our training sessions, grant deadlines, and legislative issues. You might also consider getting more involved by requesting an appointment to a task force or getting elected to serve on a committee. These are the groups where much of SEMCOG's work is done. There are committee elections that take place every June at our General Assembly meeting. Task forces are a place where you request appointment, and Councilmember Griswold is taking advantage of that opportunity by serving on our Bicycle and Pedestrian Task Force. And as these groups are also open to city staff, Eli Cooper is a long-serving member of our Transportation Coordinating Council, and Molly Macheski served on our Future Skills Task Force, which just concluded work recently. And I'll just mention one of the things coming out of that task force, which we're gearing up on, will probably be starting to use maybe early next year, is a public education campaign to bring more awareness to public service jobs. So we're going to have some posters where local communities can add their own information, human resources director, that kind of contact information. And we hope that those posters will be up throughout the region at government halls and at schools. Our guiding vision at SEMCOG is that all the people of Southeast Michigan benefit from a connected, thriving region of small towns, dynamic urban centers, active waterfronts, diverse neighborhoods, premier educational institutions, and abundant agricultural, recreational, and natural resources. High-quality data is the foundation of the work we do to accomplish this vision. SEMCOG collects and analyzes data on people, the economy and jobs, housing, transportation, the environment, and land use. Our newest mapping tool allows you to view various community data at the same time. This example shows Ann Arbor's total population on the map, and then the chart on the lower left is showing population density. We also have forecast data, which projects the region's future economic and demographic outlook, and all of this information is available on our website. Our 2045 forecast data shows that our demographics are changing. Our population is becoming older, and our school-age population is decreasing. Whereas for the region, the year where we're predicted to have more on the older end and fewer on the younger end is 2026. It looks like here in Ann Arbor, you're going to hit that tipping point just a little bit earlier. This dynamic impacts how communities plan for the future and provide needed services to meet the demands of residents. At the same time as we've got this changing demographic, we'll have fewer prime working age people than available jobs. Because this will impact our economic growth, this dynamic will be something that our new regional economic development strategy will address, and Trevor is going to tell you how you can provide some input to that strategy in just a few minutes. Another way we ensure data is useful at the local level is with our interactive mapping tool. This allows members and the public to zoom into specific locations in the region and receive customized data on a wide range of topics, including employment density, as you see here, traffic volumes, commuting patterns, and pavement conditions. These pavement conditions provide the latest available rating of good, fair, or poor for roadways across the region. We've shared that pavement information with legislators and with the governor's office as they are discussing road funding proposals. As I said, all of this information can be found on our website. In addition, I encourage you to reach out to Stephanie Taylor, who is our Information Center staff person. We always have someone available to help you based on your specific needs. And with that, Trevor is going to talk to you about some of the plans that we're working on.
Thank you, Amy, and hello, everyone. SEMCOG has a variety of planning areas that we address for regional planning. We have our traffic safety plan, a bicycle and pedestrian travel plan, green infrastructure plan, economic development strategy, water resources, parks and recreation, and of course, transportation. All of these have been renewed and produced over the last 3 or 4 years, and so they go on a cycle to keep them fresh and updated to new trends and to keep them as up to date as possible. Our 2045 regional transportation plan was just passed January of this year. and charts the course for maintaining and improving our transportation system into the future, and makes us eligible for $1 billion in federal transportation money annually. The plan explains SEMCOG's role in transportation planning, its connection to other regional plans, and the impact on the economy, the environment, and includes projects, policies, and actions to implement the plan. A little more short-term is our Transportation Improvement Program. This is our 4-year implementation of all of the money that is available for, or that uses federal grants in its implementation. This chart shows the value of the local transportation projects invested in Washtenaw County for the 4-year TIP from 2020 to 2023 by type of project. Reflecting local priorities, over half the money is invested in transit in Washtenaw County, and about 1/3 in road pavement preservation, between 2% and 5% in safety, ped and bike projects, bridge repair, and traffic operations. The non-pavement portion of the projects, while they're small, are larger than what is usually represented in other counties in the SEMCOG region. Ensuring the roadways are safe is a goal of the region's traffic safety plan, which identifies safety needs and guides investment decisions to reduce fatalities and injuries on our roadways. It benchmarks traffic crashes and identifies problem areas. Most importantly, it includes specific strategies to address these challenges. Amy showed a variety of interactive maps. Safety data is included in that. Our safety map shares crash data that is usable and easy to understand in formats with communities. For example, our crash location map includes all crashes in the regions over the last 5 years by crash severity, as well as other key factors such as alcohol, young driver, pedestrian, and bicycle involved crashes. This information is available at the community level. Shown here are crashes in Ann Arbor over the last 5 years, and it's zoomed in to Getty's near Washtenaw. Each of those dots can be clicked upon to see more information about that particular crash, as well as you can dig in even farther and get the actual police report for the inciting incident. Information on each crash, I said that. One of the main safety concerns in increasing crashes is involving pedestrians and bicyclists. More and more, there are people walking and biking on our roadways, and we're needing to reduce the amount and risk to their lives while they do so. While crashes are less than 2% of all traffic crashes, they account for over 28% of all traffic-related fatalities. When people are hit when they're walking and biking, that is much more severe. Our safety education campaign, called Walk, Bike, Drive Safe, reflects the fact that everyone has a role to play in pedestrian and bicycle safety. Hopefully you've seen the messaging or the bike lights and wristbands we've provided. Eli has requested these materials to distribute throughout the city. I think I myself have seen them around the area. Speaking of walking and biking, SEMCOG assists communities in planning and implementing bicycle and pedestrians projects. In the region, we have over 3,000 miles of bikeways and pathways. Earlier this year, we launched a bicycle and pedestrian task force. I believe Councilmember Griswold is part of this group, which currently is working to develop a plan to ensure walking and biking connections across the region. We've also developed an interactive bicycle network map that provides communities with a one-stop shop for all the biking facilities in the region. As these facilities have proliferated throughout the region, we're needing to do more and more keep an updated guide for what is around in the region, and to be able to identify maps and priorities and the expansion of these facilities. And with transit, SEMCOG coordinates with transit providers and the Regional Transit Authority to program investment, collect data, and planning. The map shown here is the transit access map that is part of the SEMCOG map gallery. The blue regions show the approximate walk time from transit stops. The RIDE, the RTA, and SEMCOG are currently coordinating on a pilot pilot service for a bus between Ann Arbor and Detroit that will continue providing a transit option when the University of Michigan service stops, and helps provide the service will also provide data on the demand for the service in the future, which will contribute to our case for piloting a commuter rail service. SEMCOG's environmental efforts focus on policies and strategies affecting the quality of Michigan's water, air, and land. Southeast Michigan's lakes, rivers, and wetlands define the region's geography and are essential to the economic health, attracting visitors and enhancing quality of life for residents. SEMCOG's water resources plan focuses on the blue economy, which is the economic impact that water has on our region. Natural resources, which includes issues related to protecting our rivers, streams, wetlands, and woodlands, and infrastructure, focusing on the quality and management of drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater systems. The water plan promotes an integrated water resources management approach needed to successfully implement each of these. An important part of implementing this plan is mapping and collecting data for our region's underground infrastructure, including drinking water, sanitary sewer, and storm sewer networks that are buried underneath major roadways. We have much less detailed information about what is underneath the ground, and it has become much more salient that we know that. We appreciate Ann Arbor for providing data in the pilot project we conducted. The program is now in full swing. As you know, infrastructure systems are essential to economic prosperity and quality of life. Understanding the condition and needs of these systems allow local governments to make informed decisions before investing in costly improvements. Knowing the condition of assets and strengthening coordination on projects will save money, minimize inconvenience to the public, and give us a stronger voice in communicating the need of these investments on roads and underground infrastructure. I encourage your continued involvement in this program, which will allow local governments to be reimbursed for providing asset data, drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure systems. Another part of implementing the water resources plan is through educating the public. SEMCOG created the One Water campaign in partnership with the Great Lakes Water Authority and the Freshwater Forum at the Cranbrook Institute of Science. The concept, which is illustrated in this logo, is quite simple. To make the brightest possible future, it's essential that we recognize the importance and interconnectedness of our water systems. Our slogan is, "Keep it fresh, keep it flowing." The campaign focuses on 3 areas: the stormwater, wastewater, and drinking water, which is the overall concern for the underground infrastructure. We're also working to implement the green infrastructure vision for Southeast Michigan. Green infrastructure includes parks, lakes, wetlands, and trees, as well as constructed green roofs, bioswales, and rain gardens. Pictured here is the green infrastructure map for Washtenaw County. The region's economic development strategy provides a framework for our public and private entities to work together to increase our region's prosperity. We are in the early stages of updating the strategy, which will focus on 3 areas: place, business, and talent. Over the summer, we hosted forums on place and business. This month, we will have a forum on talent. That's on September 11th. More importantly, I want you to know that on December 10th, we'll be hosting a forum here in the county, which will touch on all 3 of these focus areas. The forum will be held in Pittsfield Township Hall. We hope we can join us at one or more of these sessions. More information will be sent via email and available through Regional Update. An important component of both economic development and environmental priorities is our parks and recreation resources. As such, earlier this year, we adopted a parks and recreation plan with the goal of ensuring that our parks and trails meet the quality of life, health, and accessibility needs for both residents and visitors. Our Southeast Michigan Park Finder is part of the developing plan as we collected park data and created a mobile app. It has information on recreation opportunities for over 2,600 parks in the region. For any park in the region, a list of amenities and information like size, ownership is provided and detailed on the screen. The pop-up there is the park at Winewood and Thaler Park. It gives a list of all the amenities that are available at each individual park. On the trail side, we've visually mapped over 1,000 miles of the region's major water and land trails through a 360-degree imagery, similar to what you would find on Google Street View. It has the border trail is the picture shown here. And there's also a picture of the water trails. This one's at the Huron River Water Trail. We have used these visual maps for planning to showcase the region's trail networks for both residents and visitors. SEMCOG is also actively engaged in legislative issues important to local governments throughout Southeast Michigan. We adopted the legislative policy platform last December. The platform focuses on the need for investment in the region's infrastructure, workforce, communities, and natural assets. We advocate in both Washington and Lansing on behalf of our members. Our priorities include infrastructure funding for roads, sewer, water, and storm, including support for the current bill proposing the creation of a stormwater management utilities to allow for a fee-based system to fund critical projects. This is House Bill 4691. Maintaining CBGB funding, support for the census, supporting programs that address education and training, and local government finance. We've also been sharing our policy positions with legislatures representing the region both in Washington and Lansing, encouraging them to use us as a resource. We are actively engaged with Governor Whitmer and her administration. Please watch Regional Update for information on legislation that SEMCOG is monitoring and for ways to engage your legislatures. Our next General Assembly will take place on October 17th in Troy, Michigan at the Michigan State University Management Education Center. This General Assembly will feature workshop sessions across a variety of topics that touch on every aspect of the planning that we went over. So a save the date card will be sent out shortly, so you can look for that soon. And you're welcome to and encouraged to connect with us over social media at any of the listed outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We also have additional SEMCOG-produced videos and podcasts that you can check out by going to our website, and a SEMCOG app that provides easy access to meeting information and directions to our office. So thank you very much for your time, and are questions next, or is this thank you very much, and we'll see you next year.
Well, if there are any questions, if folks have questions, we can certainly entertain some questions. Councilmember Griswold.
When you talk about the database for crashes, I know that Michigan Traffic Crash Facts also has an interface, and I'm just wondering who maintains the actual database where the UD10s go? Is it the state police, or?
The state police maintain the UD10s. They've given us access to the UD10s, and so we can call them, we can have them served up through our website. But it's using that central source for the Michigan State Police.
Okay, so the state police actually have an IT department that maintains the UD10 data?
I believe that is the case.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Further questions? Councilor Lum.
Thank you. Just one general question. There's one slide which you showed that there's the $20 million transportation improvement allocations, how that's spread.
The pie chart?
Yes, and how that's allocated in Washington. Just a general question. Do our allocations, I don't know, do they mirror what other counties in Southeast Michigan typically, how they spend those dollars, or? Because we spend a lot on transit.
We do spend a lot there's a lot spent on transit. Typically, it's about half is spent on transit, and most of the rest is spent on pavement. Those don't bleed over all that much. Like the dollars that are leveraged for transit can't be leveraged for roads and vice versa all that easily. So the more unique shape of the Washtenaw County pie is that there's more money spent on safety projects, pet and bike projects, operational projects. So some of the minor categories that are there, the Washtenaw County has a slightly larger, what's that?
Other counties do not spend it in these areas?
Many other counties have more of their money spent directly on pavement preservation and pavement preservation only. we're often encourage people to look for a mix and often look for projects that build several features in, that depending on what the community's needs are. But pavement is something that is in poor condition all around the region, so it is a pretty easy call to spend money on pavement. Unfortunately, the amount of money that's available for spending on transportation altogether is woefully short. We estimate that we need to be spending about 3 times the amount of money annually to get us up to a state of good or fair condition in a decade. And so even if others were switched over to pavement, we wouldn't see a market
Still
increase
not-
in pavement condition.
Right. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you, and thank you for coming tonight, sharing this information. I got a question that kind of goes along with what Councilmember Lemon, you touched on already. Big chunk of money going towards transit, and the whole RTA initiative coming back to us. How will that affect, or what's SEMCOG's position? Is there anything, I've heard some conversations, but since you're here tonight, how that will fit into this? It's obviously a smaller regional authority than SEMCOG. So if you can kind of explain to us how that might mesh with what we're listening to here with these numbers. And
So you want to know what our relationship is with the Regional Transit Authority and what
if it's approved in 2020, because they want to come back one more time.
Right, so my understanding of first of all, SEMCOG is supportive of the RTA. Their desks are in our building, and we try to supplement them with service and data and so forth as they're making their plans and strategies. They don't cover our entire region, so we do transit planning for the non-RTA counties throughout the region. And I believe that the RTA is currently forming a new plan that has yet to be voted on by their board that addresses many of the concerns that came back the last time the vote took place. And they are weighing the timing of a potential new vote depending on the feeling of their board and so forth. So I guess I can't really speculate about what type of ask they'll be making this next time, but assuming that it will be around the same scale and maybe distributed differently, maybe a little bit less, a little bit more, that will be about a doubling of transit expenditures or investments in the region. And so Ann Arbor already spends a considerable amount of resources on transit. And so there will be, at least in the last plan, a lot more regional connections in Ann Arbor. I know there was a concern that there wouldn't be as good a value in participating in the RTA that came out. And so I know the RTA is cognizant of that and working to make sure that there's a good value proposition for all the member counties.
All right, well, I appreciate that.
Any other questions? Thanks a ton. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Bannister.
Yes, we've been doing a lot of work on our environmental commission about trees and landmark trees and heritage trees and working with the Washtenaw County Road Commission to minimize use of herbicides and pesticides along the roadways and everything. So when you mentioned woodlands and green infrastructure and such, have you seen any new trends or changes in light of climate action activities related to those features?
We collect a lot of aerial imagery, and it's been a few years that we did the analysis for a tree canopy layer. Unfortunately, we haven't done a second run of that analysis, and so we don't have a trend, but we do have overall tree cover by county as a baseline. As baseline information for us. And so we're generally encouraging in our green infrastructure plan for more trees. They act as a really good break for rain and runoff, and so are wanting to increase the amount of trees that are in our region in general throughout both urban and rural areas.
Great.
Further questions?
Just one of access.
Please,
Thank you.
Councilmember Hayner.
So this data and these data sets, the map overlays and all that, how is that available to us again? Is that
If you go to our
for
web.
us also?
Yes,
You? Okay.
so you're always, anything you don't find, you're always welcome to email SEMCOG or call one of us and ask specifically, but we've done a whole lot of surfacing a lot of our data on our website, and we've gotten much better at creating interactive mapping. So on our website, we have a map gallery that can point you to all of the active maps that we have that go across all of the subject areas that we have, and we're always looking to improve those maps and make the data more and more available through just pointing and clicking rather than needing to download access tables and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion? Thanks so much. Very
Thank you
grateful.
very much, Mayor.
Ready? All right, I'd also like to thank representatives from SEMCOG for coming and sharing their data and their overview of the services they provide to the region. We're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about the solid waste updates, and specifically the solid waste resource management plan. And what I'd like to do is provide a little bit of an overview and talk about some of the desired outcomes. So for tonight, for this work session in the coming weeks, we want to provide the detail and background to the council on the recent efforts related to our solid waste programs. And you can see the sub-bullets there. We need to gain an understanding of council's initial thoughts and reactions to the regional management authority membership, and then also the resource management plan recommendations, and then get your input to take back to the Environmental Commission and obtain closure on the solid waste resource management plan. It's important to note that at the last meeting of the Environmental Commission, the Commission did not make a recommendation, and there were some points that could be considered contentious that came up. At that time, rather than bring something forward without the recommendation, we thought the most efficient way to get through those concerns was to come back to council, take advantage of this work session, get your feedback, integrate that back into the plan, have another discussion with the Environmental Commission at their next meeting, and then come back to council. There is a sense of urgency and immediacy to get through that process and to get council's guidance. Several key decisions have to be made both now and as we head into the budget process concerning partnering, contracting, equipment replacement, and procurement. And those things, while June may seem a long winter away, we know that time goes by quickly, and we're really looking at 9 months to be prepared to move on to the next phase of how we manage solid waste within the community. The solid waste resource management plan did provide multiple means for obtaining community input and engagement. I know that was something that came up. In addition to the stakeholder group, a community survey was conducted. The results from the recent National Citizen Survey were also considered, and all perspectives were thoroughly looked at and incorporated into the plan's recommendations. There was concern that the solid waste resource management plan did not address performance outcomes. Well, the goals that are in the sustainability framework are still applicable, and we will integrate those into the final document. Those goals include the achievement of 40% waste diversion, expanded curbside compost collection, implementation of a fats, oils, and grease collection program in the downtown, implementation of multifamily recycling, and improved services in the downtown. And at the recommendation of the Environmental Commission, those goals will be restated. There was concern that staff does not have performance measures, and I will tell you that we do have those for recycling and solid waste. We look at the total tonnage of what comes in. We do look at how much is diverted. We look at residual rates as well. We also track missed pickups, and those can be brought into the plan. It's important to note that the solid waste resource management plan was also intended to provide a financially sustainable business approach for our operations. We're concerned about the long-term health of the solid waste plan. We also know that there's a limit to how many millages we can impose upon our ratepayers and taxpayers as a matter of looking at affordability of the community. So making some tough calls now will help us to make sure that the fund retains a healthy balance and can meet the needs of the community. This is a future-looking, forward-looking plan as well. And therefore, we should really all expect that there'll be some tough choices to make as we look at relationships, both past, current, and future. So those are things that Mr. Yupi and Mr. Slotin will talk about, and then I'm sure that we'll have a very good conversation after that. Again, our intent is to take council's input, modify the plan, go back to the Environmental Commission, and then present this back to council at one of your meetings in October so we can get it formally accepted. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Yupi and rejoin you on the dais.
Thank you. First of all, I want to introduce staff that are here with me tonight. There's Crescent Slotin of Public Services area, Molly Maciejewski, Public Services, but Operations and Public Works, and Marty Pershan, who is our Chief of Staff and keeps us all organized and headed in the right direction. I want to emphasize a couple of points as we go through the plan tonight, is we are looking for your direction, but having to stress to you that this is not an a la carte plan. We can't pick item 1 and not pick item 2. There is a strong interrelationship between the various elements in the plan as we look to go forward. If we're going to do, and for an example, if we're going to do year-round compost, it means we have to bring recycling in-house to gain the savings so that we can do year-round compost and other programs with that savings. So the plan is interrelated to each element. And stressing that we need direction quickly. The lead time on vehicles is 9 months or longer. So if we want to make a transition in June, you do the math backwards, we should be making decisions on vehicles almost today. So whether we end up bringing services in-house or we have contractors doing the work, they need lead time for vehicles. So that's critical that we move forward in a rapid fashion. And with that, I'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Craig. Good evening, Mayor, Council. Again, I'm Crescent Slotin with the Public Services area. And tonight, as been outlined, kind of broken presentation into a couple of sections. Want to begin just focused, shouldn't take too much time, but provide background and information on the WARMA Authority, the Washtenaw Regional Resource Management Authority that was presented to Council in the spring. And the council decision was to table that item until the solid waste plan was completed. And so as part of this presentation, we want to provide background that seemed to be lacking and answer some questions that were asked at that time so that we could provide more information than had previously been provided and provide the status of that authority as it stands. And then we'll take a quick pause, see if we have some specific questions around that, but also being sensitive to time. And we've got a lot of information through the solid waste management plan to go through as well. So I'll try to keep us on track as well. But then following that, we will go through the solid waste management plan. I'll provide background on the overview of the plan. Howard and Craig have done a good job setting the stage. I'll add a little more background to that, but really cover the process that we've taken, the elements, the steps that we took. And then I'm going to transition over to Molly Maciejewski for the recommendation section, as she will be heading up the group that implements any recommendations that come out through our operations folks. And then I'll come back and just wrap up just a couple of quick items, but they are interrelated actually to the plan and the recommendations of some other activities. Those expiring contracts, as Mr. Hupy mentioned, and also staffing that may result out of the recommendations. And then open it up one last time for any questions on the plan itself and anything else that remains. And so to move through that, I will begin with Warma and the Washtenaw County and work with the county on that. Very briefly, first to set stage, counties in the state of Michigan are required to have solid waste plans in place by the state. So Washtenaw County saw that they needed to update and amend their plan in 2015. And so in August, they formed a committee to do that work. And we had a staff member that actually sat on that committee, represented the local municipality perspective for that effort. A couple of key things to point out on the slide here of the goal that really leads into the idea of a regional authority. First was a fundamental guiding principle about working together to have greater impact and cost benefit. Communities can have that greater benefit collaboratively rather than working individually. So that was a fundamental principle of that plan. And then two specific goals that are highlighted in that plan. Goal number 3, in terms of developing, supporting, monitoring comprehensive education, outreach, feedback programs to support that plan. And goal number 5, to operate collaboratively within the county and regionally, even outside of the county, to develop comprehensive sustainable materials management strategy. So collectively, we can do a lot more, be a lot more effective. Parallel with that effort, the county also undertook a study to look at waste diversion facilities, but particularly the drop-off facilities and the range of drop-off facilities within the county. This is a key piece to help feed into that countywide plan, gain an understanding of those facilities and the need for those. So they hired local consultant RRS to perform that study. Again, the city participated. We helped out with that. We sat in on the team that helped develop that, review the plan. And a particular item of note, to bring it back here locally, and looking at those facilities, that study looked at our drop-off station on Ellsworth Road. Folks are very familiar with it. It's been in our capital plan for years. People are waiting for that to be replaced. They came to that same conclusion, but gave some good information too, noting that that facility already and has for several years operates as a regional facility. Less than half of the customers of that facility are city residents. The majority of the customers are actually outside the city. So it is a regional facility. And at that point, and this is actually 2017 dollars, put the replacement of that at approximately $4.8 million for a new facility, close but different site, because it's not good to put a facility on top of an old landfill, as we now know. And so the funding for that, the plan recommends, was to be funded through the county and a consortium of local units of government. So those regional partners, the folks where those customers are all coming from, should participate in that type of regional facility. So with the solid waste plan, speaking to collaborative regional approaches, and this study I just mentioned, also looking at the county-wide drop-off and recycling type facilities, such as our drop-off station, the county then moved forward to really look at, more seriously, the potential for regional cooperation. What does it look like? Who is interested? Can we move this idea forward? And so I'm not going to go through all of the bullets for time's sake, but the key points being that, again, the county engaged RRS to look at a regional authority potential more specifically, set up specific times, drawing in stakeholders for organized and specific conversations around, does this make sense? Is there interest? Is this a possibility that we can move forward? And so through initial stakeholder discussions and then culminating in January of 2018 with some specific stakeholder meetings and even interviews, some very specific questions and information that was garnered from multiple stakeholders. 11 municipalities participated. The Western Washtenaw, that's WWRA, Western Washtenaw Recycling Authority, and institutions such as U of M and nonprofits and service providers. So from that, RRS developed and put together their regional authority study. And the study's findings said that, yes, there is advantage, there is opportunity here, there is interest in regional collaboration around solid waste, materials management, and recycling. And they cited in their document 2 key foundational items that really this approach can build off of. One, already mentioned the solid waste plan the county amended, but also pointing out the status of the city's material recovery facility, that at that point our MRF had stopped as a processing facility in July of 16, but that was seen as an opportunity. Could that facility be restarted, but around a regional approach with the communities in the area to feed into and provide the appropriate capacity of material for that? Again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to read through all the bullets, but several advantages to regional cooperation, but basically standardization, get us all recycling consistently, whether you live in Saline, work in Ann Arbor, vice versa. You know how to recycle the same if you're doing it in a standard manner across all of our partners. And also potential for cost sharing. The end result of recommendations, this study laid out 3 tiers of recommendations. First, at the initial and lower level, education and outreach and technical assistance through the county, helping those neighbors and doing, again, that common outreach and education that is so important in any resource management and recycling program. Second tier, then being back to those drop-off facilities, providing easy and convenient access for folks to do their recycling, basically reinforcing and restating the recommendations from that earlier study by RRS the year before. And then that next longer tier, but again, building off of that opportunity we have with our facility or some other location, but working regionally to develop a permanent materials recovery facility for the folks in the region with a real regional solution. So then, with the next step, lots of steps here, but the county keep moving us forward, and city staff have been moving right along with them and keeping informed and participating. So June 2018, a little over a year ago, the county formed an authority formation committee. By now, lots of communities have come, at least listened, weighed in, and now we've gotten down to 8 communities that are really still pretty darn serious, still looking at this potential, still thinking, yep, we think this might make sense. And so the 8 communities there listed, which included the city of Ann Arbor, we had staff, myself included, along with Craig and Molly, participating with meetings from June to November 18th to really look at this potential, and it was facilitated by the county and was based around Public Act 179 of the state acts, which lays out requirements and the way to establish a solid waste authority. So a question that sometimes has come up is, well, what about people like the University of Michigan or the Ann Arbor Public Schools? They seem to be shut out of something like this. Well, Public Act 179 lays out that solid waste authorities can be created, but the members have to be municipalities. But that doesn't mean that those other entities, those other key partners, can't participate. They could still provide or receive services, be part of discussions and programs, but they aren't allowed to have a seat at the table as a voting seat on the board. So that's where that line is drawn. So the committee and those representatives from those 8 communities met over those months, and the items that were discussed and really seen as the potential initial efforts. What does this WARMA, try to answer a question a lot of people probably have, what's this WARMA about? What's it going to do? And it's got to get off the ground. So there's some initial steps, initial areas of focus. So again, keep coming back to education and outreach, informing people what's the right way to recycle. How do we deal with our materials in a best manner? How do we reduce even what we need? And doing that in a common and consistent manner. And how do we improve our quality and our quantity of our recyclables? Then also data and metrics. Tracking among the members, whoever ends up participating in this authority, how are they recycling, what are they recycling, but also tracking it, again, in a consistent manner, collaboratively, cooperatively, so that we can understand those people, member communities, how are they doing individually, but also collectively. Really with the goal being working collectively to become attractive communities for a processor, a recycler, that would want to come in, that would want to invest, that would want be desiring to come in to Warma, whoever Warma is, as a processor, and want to take our recyclables, their recyclables, and process them, invest in a MRF facility for that region. And then last, for those communities, again, emphasize those communities that contract out collection, there could longer range be an opportunity for, back to those cost savings and cost opportunities, collaborative contracting for those that do the cost contracted collections. But again, that could be something that members could choose to opt in or not. And so those are the things that the committee members spoke to. So as to the status of Warma, where do we stand today? That committee, last met in November, ended by putting together articles of incorporation, the document that would lay out and establish Warma as an entity. Those articles were presented to the boards and councils early this year, January to April timeframe, as I recall. It was presented in March to this body here. 7 of the 8 municipalities did vote to adopt the articles and say that they wanted to join Warma. As we know, we decided we were going to wait till the solid waste plan was done, which is now, and coming back with the information. So the other 7 listed there have voted to join Warma and adopt the articles. In July 11th, those representatives did have a meeting. The county organized them, brought them together, and they invited the city. Actually, I attended as the staff person to update that group of where does the city stand, what's happened as far as Warma, and that relation with the solid waste management plan. It was clear, let them know that council, you folks did not say no. You did not push it away and vote it down. But you wanted to wait for our plan to be done, and I provided them input and update in terms of where our plan stood and the timing for that. And actually said probably be about the September timeframe that things would be wrapping up. They were appreciative of the update and our expressed interest in certainly the city to join, to participate, but yet at the same time, they have made a decision to go forward, and collectively around the table, they decided that they did indeed want to move forward and asked the county to take the steps to officially establish the authority. There's papers that have to be filed and notices published. So that is underway and may even be done. I haven't checked in with the county recently. But their first official board meeting for the authority is scheduled for September 23rd. So my understanding is that will be in place, and that would be the official first meeting of the board. So they will be an established entity. It doesn't shut us out. That doesn't mean the city or anyone else can't join right after or anytime down the road in the future, but it does change the process. That now is an established authority. The city could request, the board request Warma for the city to join. And what that means is that they would have to agree to amend their articles of incorporation, their document, because that lists the members of the authority. And so to add a community means to amend the document. So we would have to ask for that amendment. The board would have to approve it. And then an added step, all of the existing member communities, their boards or councils would also have to approve that amended set of articles. So it can't be done. You folks can still decide that's something we want to do, and that can be taken to the board and the steps put in place to have those articles amended. And just to wrap up that staff, and as noted in the March item to the council, that the Environmental Commission has supported joining Warma for those items that I touched on through the presentation. And so with that, I apologize for a bit of the speed through that, but open it up, see if there's questions or discussion around Warma in particular.
Councilor Lum.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Mr. Slotin. Just in terms of, I'll have a question on Warma for you. I would just say in general, since I guess you want our feedback too, it's been my kind of experience that when folks talk regional anything, there are these visions of economies of scale and reduced costs for everyone. And I do suspect that for the smaller townships and municipalities in the county, there very well may be economies of scale and increased diversion opportunities. But for the city of Ann Arbor, who's obviously the dominant player by orders of magnitude in the authority, it's not at all clear what the financial implications would be of our participating in any of the contemplated regional efforts. And as we all know, the cost benefit for the city will be wholly dependent on the specific cost-sharing agreements that the authority develops. And at this point, none of those exist. And there's no information that's been provided on the cost implications for the city. The Solid Waste Regional Management Plan contains a wealth of information and cost data. It's really good data and analysis that will certainly be helpful in decision-making. But the study that we're reviewing tonight, appropriately, I think, does not venture a guess as to the financial implications for the city joining the authority. So where I'm coming from, at some point, in the future, perhaps, we consider joining an authority, but not now, in my opinion. The governance structure, I think, is very problematic, wearing the city's hat. And for me, only if there were change in the basic governance structure of the authority where the voting power is volume weighted, not one member, one vote. I wouldn't support the city joining any authority or cooperative where we were the dominant player, but we didn't have the corresponding voting power and authority. And that's what WARMA is. And to be honest, I'm not real confident that the city would be treated equitably. The county's track record in this regard, based on the recent mental health and public safety millage, demonstrates that the county has no qualms about sticking it to the city financially for the benefit of the balance of the county. In the case of the millage, by distributing the millage rebate proceeds based on population, not based on taxes paid, the city of Ann Arbor ended up subsidizing the other county municipalities to the tune of about $250,000 a year. The county commissioners knew that and consciously structured it that way. So I don't think that bodes well for an equal playing field for the city. So I have a lot of reservations. And the governance structure, for me is a red flag. And then just lastly, in terms of regional cooperation, rather than on authority, I'd like to see us focus on specifically on the drop-off station. I was very surprised to see that just half the users were Ann Arbor residents. Was it 53% or not? And then later, if you could come back with this information, you did show the projection for the cost replacement cost is $4.8 million. So if you could provide us, I think this would be helpful, the major assumptions, size, location, functionality, who pays, et cetera. I know you said that this would be funded regionally, but that were used in developing, the assumptions that were used in developing that 4.8 million projection, that would be helpful. So thank you very much.
Further discussion or questions? Councilmember Bannister.
Thank you, Chris. And there was one other question about that the current bylaws and articles of the WARMA don't provide explicit labor protections or equitable terms of governance. Do you know that it's, here in Ann Arbor, we like to maintain our collective bargaining rights of employees for providing the solid waste services, and the WARMA does not state that in their articles and bylaws. It hasn't been updated for that yet. Was there any discussion of that at your July 11 meeting?
If I could just jump in a little bit, I think we've all heard and understand the concern about the city being the largest population center in the county. If the city were to join, it's not obligated to enter into any agreement at all if the terms are not consistent with providing us with best value or with any other values that we may have. And that would include ensuring that contracts provide for a living wage. I think it's problematic, though, that we can't prescribe union membership in those agreements. I think that's a violation of state statute. But again, if we're not comfortable with a contract that would come before the regional authority, we wouldn't have to join it. So therefore, if the city doesn't join it, a significant portion of the value is lost because you don't get the economies of scale. So there is an indirect representation to how we would participate based on those things that would be the contracts that would be sought. So that is just something for council to consider.
Councilor Bannister, you still have the floor.
I'm all set, thanks.
Further discussion, Councilmember Eaton.
So to that point, I want to reiterate what Councilmember Lum said, and what I think Councilmember Bannister is saying, is that before we join this authority, we should ask for the changes in the Articles of Incorporation that we expect. It's not a workable form unless we join. But if we join before we're given proper representation in that body, our only resort is to leave the organization if we don't get our way. I believe that we should assert that before we join, that we ask that we have a proportionate vote on that body's board, that we be able to offer labor protections, not necessarily the right to unionize, but certainly a guarantee that no current employee of any municipal solid waste service be disadvantaged in wages or benefits by our participation in this. And so if we don't accomplish those changes before we join, we have the same vote as every one of the townships and villages that already belong. So I just want that to be the warning that I can't support this form of governance with this disparate weighting of authority.
Further discussion on this point? Councilmember Rambawi.
Thank you. I just want to concur with my colleagues on that. Just listening here, weighing in both options and all sides to the argument. I still feel like we give up a lot of certainty for a lot of uncertainty. And in order to do that, it needs to be defined in a better way for us to give away that type of certainty. And what Councilmember Lum had to say about the mental health rebate millage, that's our last example. So I don't feel that this is being sold in that same vein, but you got to understand that in a lot of ways we are donors to the surrounding communities, and the heavy's getting the load's getting heavy. So look forward to hearing more.
For my part, I would support joining the authority as is. I view it as getting a seat at the table. There are plenty of off-ramps with respect to commitments for the city. We are not committing ourselves to anything except to participation in an organization that will plan regionally. This is the place where we're going to have conversations, or we would have conversations with our regional partners. The fact that we have one vote at this location, the fact that we would have one vote on this board, to me, is immaterial, because we would have the only vote with respect to whether or not we're going to sign on to the contract devised by this group. That is a veto, a veto that cannot be overridden with respect to whether or not we're going to participate in whatever plan the organization would develop, whatever we would need to make sure that it's right for Ann Arbor, that it's a value to Ann Arbor. In my view, it is it is without risk, and it is the only opportunity, the only location for us all to have reasoned, respectful conversation with colleagues. I understand the concern with respect to a lack of certainty at this point, but I don't view that as a bar. This is a group which is designed to create a contract. The contract is the location or a plan, and then a contract ultimately. The contract and that plan will be the point where we have clarity. This is just a group that will arrive at that together. In my view, it would be regrettable and not thinking in the long term for us to decline to participate. Further discussion, then perhaps move on to the balance of the presentation. Councilmember Lum.
Just, if we're singing the praises of regionalism, I see that U of M was included as a stakeholder. That makes sense. But they can't participate. That doesn't make sense. I know there's a state law that, so they're not defined as a municipal form of government, but, for us in Ann Arbor, it makes a lot more sense, and for the university to collaborate and cooperate, much more so than for Ann Arbor to, hitch its wagon to Dexter and Saline. It just, intuitively, again, if you're talking about, have a vision of economies of scale and reduce costs, that seems to be the much more logical path. But again, as I said, I appreciate what other council members have said, Eaton and Ramlawi and Councilmember Lowy pointing out that, there are so many uncertainties. And again, we have no information on the cost implications for the city at this juncture. So that world of uncertainty is quite a big one, so thank you.
How much does it cost to participate in this?
$5,000.
Thank you.
Talking about.
Further discussion?
The membership fee.
All right, let's move on to the plan.
Okay. So the Solid Waste Resources Management Plan, SHRIMP. Sorry, I couldn't come up with a better acronym. So, as I mentioned, I'll go over a bit of overview, but really mostly dig into the process that we went through to develop the plan, and then we'll turn things over to Molly for the recommendations for implementation. So in terms of the SHRIMP, provided an overview
Shrimp.
as a,
I
my
know.
apologies.
It is what it is.
As the slide says, a roadmap for our resource management services for the next 5 years and beyond. Looking at our current programs, where should those programs go in the future? It was to include a cost of service analysis, gain a true understanding of what does it cost to provide the services we already provide, to help us figure out what is it going to take to expand and improve those. Looking at peer communities, robust public engagement. Emphasize the word robust, and I'll get into the detail in a second, but I'll just pause that in my 32 and a half years, I started here when I was 12, 32 and a half years with the city, this was probably the most robust engagement effort, breadth and depth and type that I've been a part of. There may have been more with the city, but very extensive. And then also looking for options and recommendations. So I'm going to pause for a second with a graphic that came out of a presentation early in the project to illustrate our current system to provide context for folks here at the council and also audience and at home. Depending on the material that goes in your container, whether it's waste, trash, recycling, or compost organics, but also depending on where you live or where you work, what type of unit or property you're in, it could be one of three parties that picks up that material. Could be the city, could be Recycle Ann Arbor, could be Waste Management under our commercial waste franchise. Those materials are collected, so we've got three entities driving trucks around town. Those materials are then taken to three post-collection facilities that the city has and has operators that, contract operators that operate those for us. The trash is taken to our waste transfer station, or advanced disposal takes that material and takes it to the landfill that they operate. The recycling materials goes to our MRF, which, as we all know, It used to be a processing MRF, but now limited manual processing, and Recycle Ann Arbor sends that material to their partner Rumpke down in Cincinnati. And then compost or organics are taken to our compost facility where our contract operator, We Care Denali, turns that into marketable packaged compost. So multiple players, multiple contracts, lots of moving parts, a very complex system. So that's what I was given to try to improve. So for this plan, the goals, and Howard did a good lead-in to set the stage, but intending here to literally pull out and clarify what were we striving for. So the top bullet here, the objective for this plan, pulled right from the RFP and the contract scope, that we were looking for a strategic approach to provide effective solid waste area services and programs that meets the needs of the community and the desires of the community. What does the community want? But critically and key, in a financially sustainable manner. It's been a concern that of the community and the organization. And again, won't go in too long because Howard hit it well. We have goals, visionary goals that are established. This is really setting out that strategic direction, laying out those steps to move us forward to advance those goals, but not to revisit and spend the time to redo them. They're still there, they're still valid. So the topic areas, I'll try to kind of guide you as the sorts of things that were looked at. So and towards those visionary goals, where are some opportunities, even looking at a programmatic level, for increasing diversion, so for moving that needle forward. So we've heard for a long time, and again, organics expansion, multifamily recycling, but even looking at some unique specialty programs such as textiles, a little different than what we've done. Looking at, again, functional and operational elements. You folks, I've heard, staff has heard about the downtown and the alleys and the services that are provided and concerns with that. Fats, oils, and grease, again, as Howard mentioned, is in our goals to move that forward. And then service delivery, looking at how do we provide those services, that complex myriad matrix that we have, how can we improve on that and administer that program in a more effective manner, and what are the costs to do so, and also they're being cognizant of the regional options as this was parallel to the Warma development. So what was produced, what was the outcome of this? We have a financial model now. Again, a lot of concerns, questions on the financial health of the solid waste fund and the solid waste system. So we now have a model based on FY18 actuals. So that fiscal year had been done and audited for this project. So our financial cost of service analysis, which I'll be getting into, is based on those actual numbers. And so those actuals are then used to look forward and help develop options and recommendations. And to head towards recommendations, the plan includes 24 total recommendations, 21 in the actual service areas, service programs, either expansion or improvement, in 5 focus areas. And I'll let Molly get into that in more detail, and 3 recommendations related to funding. So to the process, and to take them kind of chunk at a time. The public engagement, as I said, robust, comprehensive. We began last summer, a year ago summer, July through September of 2018. 33 separate stakeholder interviews, wide range of parties, perspectives involved and affected by our solid waste programs. Staff, contractors, business folks, commissioners, environmental commissioners, downtown businesses, our contractors and service providers. With a concern around the downtown, we had a specific focus group in September with representatives of the downtown. Again, merchant associations, businesses, property owners. This project included a scientifically valid resident survey. I'll touch on that a little bit further, but it felt a very key element to truly get a valid pulse on reaction of the community that we can be confident in its results. And the project had an advisory committee that met beginning in November of 2018 and wrapped up with a 5th meeting. If folks remember, you approved a change order to add a 5th meeting at the request of the committee. Met in August. Again, my luck on this project, the largest advisory committee I've had, 60-plus participants that we had more than 60 people that attended at least one, and most of them attended multiple meetings. I had people that wondered how my public meeting went, and I told them, no, that was my advisory committee, not an open public meeting. And those folks represented more than 30 organizations and the community at large. We had general residents involved as well. So to kind of step back in terms of process, and I apologize, can't read this. Let's zoom in after I'm done on the PDF. But this was an outcome of those stakeholder interviews. If folks have gone through a planning process, especially the last several years, you may have heard of a SWOT analysis, where around a topic or an issue or an item, you're looking at what are the strengths around this item, what are its weaknesses, where are there opportunities, where are things that we could look to move forward or go, and then rather than threats, which is what usually the T is, we use the word needs. We saw them as needs, not threats. And so this came from the stakeholder discussions, stakeholder interviews, and that's what was built upon moving forward, and the focus group as well, into the advisory committee, the recommendations, the benchmarking, which I'll get to, and the citizen survey. So to speak of the citizen survey, I mentioned this was a scientifically valid survey. Not to get too into the weeds, but I think it's important. We did a phone survey. So this was a sub-consultant on the team, an actual survey firm, that they made thousands of phone calls to literally get 400 respondents in the community validated, balanced between homeowners and renters. That was a key part, that our community is made up largely of renters, and so that was made in the makeup of the respondents. Because of the process and the rigor given to the questions, there is, not to get too wonky on it, but 95% confidence level at a margin of error of 4.9%. So the way I describe it, the way it was explained to me, if we have a question and the response, 75% of the respondents said yes, we have a 95% confidence level that within 4.9%, call it 5%, the community at large would say yes. So in my example, if it was 75%, we're 95% confident the community would be 70 to 80 would be that range. That's what that means. And as listed here are the broad range of topics that were built into the questions to try to get feedback from the community at large. So to get into some of what we heard, in terms of satisfaction from those residents, the people actually getting the service at their homes, literally, whether it's a homeowner or a rental. The collection services, whether it's garbage collections by the city, recycling collection services, Recycling Arbor, here in a bit, high level of satisfaction, 96% for the city, 93% for Recycling Arbor. Compost, obviously you'll see lesser, but a key point here, and a takeaway, as I mentioned, renters were a key part, and I believe almost 50%. And renters, especially apartment complexes, they don't participate and even necessarily know about the compost program. And so the DK means don't know, or REF refuse. So that's where on the compost collection, 23% didn't know, didn't have a response, or refused to answer. And we take that as that heavy weight of the rental population that responded. Another item that the survey told us is that residents do want additional services. Our two highest respondents, they're all listed there, but the two I'll highlight there on the left, at 27%. Folks are looking for bulky waste collection as part of their city programs, as well as, again, still hearing the year-round compost collection. Still out there, we know, we're trying to get there, as you'll see. And then to the right there, that graph is representing, we ask questions, would there be a willingness to pay a little more to get those added services? And the ranges there on that box graph, those were presented. So for example, would you be willing to pay $1 to $3 per month more to get added services? 89% of people said, yeah, I'd pay $1 to $3 more. And then inclining up. And all the way to $8 to $10 per month more, you're getting pretty close to 50-50, but it's still slightly over half are still saying, I'd even be willing to pay $8 to $10 more for those added services that I'm looking for. Questions were asked, how folks want to pay for their services. As I believe you're aware, we have a solid waste millage, so we recover revenue through property taxes. Other communities have flat fees. You'll hear the term pay-as-you-throw, which there's variations to that, bags, stickers, different ways where it's more of a flat fee. You pay one price for a sticker to get a bag of trash. But what we heard from the residents was very strongly that they're happy that actually they prefer a property and millage base, that we saw that as the community's values on equity, that they don't want that flat fee, that if folks are more able through their property taxes to fund more, they're okay with that. And in fact, they prefer that at 68% with having it that way versus only 27% being opposed to that. And then the flip side of that, would you want a fixed monthly bill? 55% said, no, actually, I don't want it that way. So that equity point came in. And then over on the right item in terms of scaling of the fees. Again, some communities, if you go pure bag, pay as you throw, it's one price. But another method is by varying with cart size. And we actually have a form of that. And so we gave actually 2 examples of that. The first one on the left with the very small increments, $27, $29, and $31, actually more closely relate to what the actual cost is, because the cost is in getting the truck there and tipping it. It's really not that much different to tip a 32-gallon cart versus a 64-gallon cart, and even processing the material. But some communities take to equate their fees based on the size of the cart. So that's the chart there on the right at 27, 54, and 81. So at increments, if the cart doubles, the price doubles. Not really equal to the true cost to deliver that service, but there is a nexus to it, there is a rationale, and the numbers are almost identical. So people are okay with that varying size. But again, the point, they're not looking for that flat charge. So, and again, for the sake of time, I'm going to try to keep moving us through. So now, cost of service analysis and the financial model. Again, just to reiterate some points, this is the opportunity where we truly took our existing financial data, and actual audited book data. The consultant, their team, took that and then sliced it and diced it, if you will, took their Ginsu knives and figured out along material streams, trash, recycling, compost, and across customers, residential, commercial. What are those costs to provide those services, and to bring them down to a unit cost basis. So the little acronyms here, so dollar per HH is household, so dollars per household per month, which is pretty common standard within the solid waste area communities, or dollars per ton. So that we can compare apples to apples across those streams for ourselves, but also with other communities. And then again, the value of this analysis to be able to compare and benchmark, but also to help develop options and look at recommendations going forward. So I'm going to run through some slides here of what is the analysis results. What does it tell us? On the expense side overall, and to try to explain this real busy slide, the pie chart represents all of the expenses for FY18 for the solid waste fund. The orange, approximately 3/4 of that pie, are the direct operational expenses. So things tied to what does it take to pick up material in a cart, in a dumpster, get it to that endpoint for processing, and get it processed. The labor, the fuel, the equipment, all those things. Then the remaining 25%-ish is pretty well equally divided by my eye. The gray portion are those, if you want to think of it as overhead. So administrative cost, customer service to support those operations, our good old municipal service charge. We got to pay for the lights to keep us running, for our IT, for all the folks in there. And then the red portion being those financial adjustments, which are going to be key as I get through in a few slides here. Those things that still are a part of our governmental function in our accounting, our GASB, our OPEB, our retiree liabilities. But in this area in particular, if you don't know, we have an old landfill that has been closed, but that's going to continue to be a liability for us, including financially. We have capital facilities and equipment that continue to depreciate and hit the budget. Those fall into that financial adjustment portion of the pie. So to start to break down those results and what they told us. So first on the residential side of service, and to take as to what the numbers tell us. To break it down to a household, and a household per month unit, it costs $29.09 total to provide the suite of solid waste services for a household. And I won't go through each pie there, but that's broken down across trash, recycling, and compost. But to point out that small red piece, city events and street side cans, that got put in as a comparison to other communities especially those that contract out services for collections. They will also contract out for their street litter cans and for events, and so they spread those over their residential customers, is how that's done. So back to that benchmarking, to be able to compare apples to apples with other communities, that's why that's added there. Then the bar graph to the right is the further breakdown of what's within those pieces of the pie chart. And to explain and walk you through those from basically left to right of each section. So first with the waste as the example, the orange bar on the left is the labor costs. So that's the city labor to go out and do our residential trash collections, our curb cart collections for the trash carts. The next two gray bars are related to the equipment, the fleet, the trucks. The darker gray is the actual truck itself. It's, not to get too complex and budgety for you, but we literally pay for the trucks and rent them from our fleet to get the funds to replace those trucks. So that's the fleet charge for the truck itself. And then the second gray bar is the funds necessary, the expenses to keep those trucks running, to repair them, to maintain them, give them their preventative maintenance, and to fuel them. The reddish bar there is the cost for processing. So if you want, separate the collections. That's after the cart is put in the truck drives to either the transfer station for trash, the MRF for recycling, or the compost center for organics. Then that material is processed. That has a cost. That's what that red bar is for that household per month. And then the kind of charcoal, not quite black, is that administrative overhead component for that function. And so you have that there for the waste, solid waste, the recycling, the point there, and we'll get into some more detail here in a bit on the orange with Recycle Ann Arbor and the labor. That's their contract cost, which, yes, is for their labor. There's also other costs for that, their supervisory and their administrative staff. But I'll note, it doesn't include trucks because, and we'll get to it in a sec, but the city provides the trucks. So those costs for their trucks are actually in those gray bars there as well. But another point there, that reddish bar for recycling points out the real cost of recycling. I mean, we're not going to stop recycling. That's a core value. We're not going to stop. But the realization, and here is it right in front of us, is it comes at quite a cost. And that's been in the headlines all around. And even communities near us, I believe it's Westland, has actually stopped their recycling program due to costs. And an item 2 on the compost one there, again, these are based on FY18 actuals. And so that was based on the actual costs. But I will point out, in FY18, with staffing situations at that time, that was heavily done by temporary staff, and that's not the case anymore. So to equate it to today, that is bumped slightly higher, but it would still be lower than the waste because that is, again, still a seasonal program and doesn't have those full expenses. So to get a little more detail and a piece about that comparison, that difference between the Recycle Ann Arbor costs, that, especially that orange bar for the labor, compared to the city costs. I mentioned and noted, kind of went over it quickly, but those were based on dollars per household per month. So some questions, concerns, and Molly will cover it too with the recommendations, with some reaction from the advisory committee and again at the environmental commission. Concerns were raised, well, that's by household, but Recycle Ann Arbor and their contract and what they are paid is based on the cart and the tip. So it's kind of an apples and oranges, not quite sure that the numbers are working out right. So the consultant, and with this slide through words, unfortunately, but read through that, took and did that analysis and changed it from per household, but did the comparison per cart. And so the left side bullets compare the Recycle Ann Arbor cart collection contract costs. So again, the Recycle Ann Arbor fee is their labor plus their contract management and support for that, invoicing us and their piece of customer service part of it. And so for that contract in FY18, that's what we're based on, they were paid $4 for each cart that they tipped, to put it on that basis. They were also paid $18.74 per ton. So when you put that across all of the carts, the net cost was $4.49 per cart per month is what the city paid to Recycle Ann Arbor. So to us, and to the cost of analysis to the city, that's a cost. That's, there's been some questions and things of, is that the cost of Recycle Ann Arbor? I can't speak to that. I can say that's what our contract says, that's what we pay. And that's what it turns out to be. And so again, here in the words, what I, again, breeze over pretty quickly is, in addition, the city has those fleet costs that we provide the fleet, the trucks, the repairs, the maintenance for those fleets as well. So those are others, and just as a point from Aptum and the consultant, it's a very unique situation. I haven't seen that where a city's actually providing it to a contract provider. So then as the comparative over on the right, and seeing my time, I'm going to get going. But that city cost by comparison is $2.44 per cart per month. So that leaves us still a $2.05 cart per month difference in the city cost to tip the cart at the curb versus what the contract with Recycle Ann Arbor for the recycling. So another key piece, not going to belabor this one too much, but just to orient everyone, commercial service. So again, we have Waste Management as a service provider. Their costs are there at the far right side in the bar there. This one's developed a little differently where the orange is the per lift cost, so that includes labor, but then the equipment as well. So this is a more consolidated presentation of those costs, not like the residential one. And then the processing being that darker color, and then the administrative costs above that. So waste management cost is to the right, and then the other three bars are aspects that we do, kind of niche work, but in that commercial area of rear load waste, multifamily waste, and front load or dumpster recycling. So I've talked a lot about expenses, and so here, first time also compared to the revenues. So on the left side, a bar graph. I'm going to flip fairly quickly because it's a little easier for me to walk through and explain on the next slide with the numbers laid out, explain. But notice the revenues are on the right and what makes up the revenues, whether it's the solid waste millage across both the commercial properties and the residential properties, and then fees and other revenues that we get, for example, on our share of recyclable commodities. And then on the right are the expenses. So basically summing up the data that I just went through on a residential, all consolidated, commercial, but then those adjustments there at the top, the landfill liability and the financial adjustments. So to lay it out, and to that point of financial sustainability, what the analysis showed for FY18, in terms of our day-to-day operations, operationally, revenue and expenses, pretty darn close. 16.6 on the revenue side, 16.1. We actually had a net of $500,000 of surplus. But it's when you bring in those adjustments, those things that are still around, that will be around, that landfill liability, that continued depreciation, the retiree benefit, the accounting procedures, and who knows what accounting procedures are going to come later. In FY18, that was a $2.4 million round number hit, so the net was a $1.88 million deficit that had to be pulled from the fund balance to make that up. So we're drawing down the balance just as is. And so to move forward is going to take some changes. So this, my last revenue-related slide, bring this in again just to show the impacts and effects of commodities and recycling. Again, recycling comes at a cost. There is some value revenue. They are commodities that can have value, but commodities, like most, if not all markets, fluctuate. And again, it's been in the headlines a lot lately. But this is a graph of the data of our revenue share from the contract with Recycle Ann Arbor for processing our recyclables, where we get a share of that revenue. And so calculating, because it's based on the markets, this is how our share on a per ton basis has been doing, not very well, over the first 2 years of that contract. So to show that has even further impact, and until the markets come back, we shouldn't be looking for added revenue on the recycling side. So nearly done with the process, and I'm going to quickly turn over to Molly on the recommendations. I'm going to breeze over peer community benchmarking. We got a set there, looked at high-performing Big Ten and Michigan communities for those things that we can compare against. And I'm going to step aside and let Molly hit on recommendations.
All right, so I'll need to talk fast, I think. I'm running out of time. So it seems to be a pattern when I get up in front of you, but I'll do my best. So before I get into the recommendations, I just want to go through the key drivers for those recommendations. So first, on the residential sector, the city really has a strong foundation in its residential solid waste programs and services. And so the goal of this plan is really to build on those existing programs and services and to be able to offer new services. Similarly, on the commercial sector, we'd like to be able to offer new services. Commercial organics comes to mind. But also importantly, we know that we have businesses right now that are not participating in trash and recycling collection. So either through the commercial franchise agreement or participating in recycling collection, which is required by ordinance. We don't have the means, though, to go out and do the outreach and enforcement needed to bring those businesses into compliance, which would actually then increase our diversion. So that was a driver for one of the recommendations, or for the recommendations. And then finally, the alleys and the downtown area. We know that we must improve conditions in the alleys. It will help overall with the downtown, with appearance, with cleanliness, safety in the alleys, both for our drivers, for pedestrians, for the business owners that are out there putting their trash and their recycles in those dumpsters and carts. But what needs to happen is really overall changes to how we manage solid waste in the downtown. So one of the key objectives, as Chris mentioned, of the plan was to come up with recommendations and a strategy for implementing those recommendations that's attainable and fiscally sustainable. We need to balance those fiscal conditions and the customer's willingness to pay with our operational interests while still providing a high quality of service. We can't start to add new programs because we run the risk then of lowering our service level, and we don't want that to happen. So with that in mind, Aptum developed recommendations. They drew from that broad public engagement that Chris talked about, the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, the focus groups, the resident survey, and those benchmark communities, the data that was collected from those, along with the cost of service analysis. Broad options were presented to staff and the advisory committee, and from there then are the recommendations that you see in front of you. I will say that you're going to see several slides like this. They're laid out the same. Starting on the left, you have the recommendation, and then the resource requirements needed to implement this recommendation, along with the anticipated cost and the impact on diversion and greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm just going to run through those residential recommendations. At the top of the list, you've heard today and for many years, year-round compost collection. And I'm quite excited actually about that particular recommendation because if implemented, it means that the city would be one of the few communities in the country to offer year-round food waste collection. And that would be quite a feat in a cold climate like this too. So we're up for the challenge. Let's do it. There is a cost, though, for that. As we've talked about, we've got to find the funding for that. We're estimating $147,000 per year. Second on the recommendations is a new program, but really this does also build on, again, the existing services that are offered in the community, which is to offer curbside textile collection. There's actually no cost to the city. Neighboring communities and peer communities that were benchmarked have this service, and this provides an option for residents that either don't have the means or the inclination to take their clothing and their linens to a donation center or a thrift shop. Those options are still available. This would just be another alternative to that. Third on the list is bulky item collection. As Cress mentioned in the resident survey, residents said that they want to see curbside bulky item collection and year-round compost collection. Those are the two services they're most interested in seeing added. Bulky item collection, again, would be in addition to what's already offered. We have drop-off centers, our drop-off station, the reuse center, those would all still be available. This would just be another option for people, and is particularly of interest for people that are aging in place, people that have mobility issues, people that don't have a means to get a bulky item to a drop-off center. So this would be an option. The cost that you see on the screen is if that assumes that the city staff were to do this, and this would be spread out over every household. This could easily be offset if you charged a fee for that service. So you could, only then the users would pay in. So that could be modified. The next recommendation is for e-waste and household hazardous waste collection. Again, expanding on what's offered already in the community. We could easily leverage partnerships with others in the region and our contractors already to expand those programs to offer curbside collection, in-home collection for a fee. That's why there's no cost on this one for those users that may want that. And then last, but most certainly not least talked about, is consolidated residential collection. In essence, this means that the city would collect all trash, compost, and recycling from curbside residential carts. It adds 7 FTEs to the city's org chart. It comes at a savings of $775,000 approximately, and that's based on that cost model that Cress talked about. As most of you know, there have been concerns raised about this particular recommendation, and so what was the rationale then for consolidated residential collection? Simply put, and Crescent mentioned this at the beginning, the city has an unnecessarily complex operational model. We don't have to be as complex as we are, and it actually erodes our service level. We have an extra administrative burden by having 2 points of contact on the residential sector. So every time a resident needs a cart repair or a change in service or has a problem with service, they might have to make multiple phone calls. It increases service efficiency in that we would have more fleet and more staffing, which would give us more flexibility in our routing and to adjust staffing during high demand periods, or to provide some of those services like I talked about, the bulky item collection, or as we'll get to, maybe some extra tips in the student area during move in and move out. It's consistent to provide service along sector, so separating out residential from commercial is common practice in the industry and is consistent with all of the benchmark communities that were evaluated by Aptum. And again, that cost savings is on there of $775,000. And if you notice here, it does say addition of 4 to 7 route drivers, which is a little different than what I said on the slide before, which was 7. 7 is strictly if you brought in all of the curbside residential recycling collection and didn't make any changes. The number could vary depending on what happens with commercial collection, which we'll get to in a minute. Actually, we'll get to it now. So on the commercial recommendations, the first recommendation is on fats, oils, and grease, better known as FOG. This is a problem in our alleys, in particular in the downtown area. We need to set standards for the containers to ensure that we don't have spills, to have proper lids, and we need to have enforcement of those standards. Right now, we don't have that. So this recommendation would put that mechanism in place so then we could go out and we could try to help clean up the alleys. Right now, restaurants contract on the open market for grease collection, and that's fine. It's just that we need to set the standards, again, around the cleanliness of it and the clutter in the alleys. There's possible that many restaurants could share containers, and that would really help, because we're going to need to make space if we look at the second recommendation, which is commercial organics collection. This is, again, an added service. There are a very small number of restaurants right now that informally have this program. This would formalize the program and be able to offer commercial organics collection to restaurants, not just in the downtown, but throughout the city. The cost on here could be offset if this were a subscription-based service, and that is a recommendation in the plan. It also adds staffing, as you can see. This, again, could be modified if commercial organics collection were rolled into a consolidated commercial collection contract. The third recommendation on commercial recommendations is student move-in, move-out support. We provide already move-in, move-out support. We contract with Recycle Ann Arbor for a drop-off center. None of that is being proposed to change. This would simply add additional tips in the student area, which is something that we've heard from apartment building owners, property owners, multiple times, and it's a struggle every year for us to be able to provide the level of service they'd like to see. So you can see here there is a cost for that as well, another thing that could be offset if we had fees for that service. Construction and demolition waste diversion is the next recommendation. That one actually was talked about in the previous solid waste management plan, but it's not something that's been talked about a whole lot since. This would be a phased approach, and what you're seeing in the recommendation is the first phase, which is to create an ordinance and then a tracking mechanism so that when someone is having a construction project, they can actually track the amount of debris that they're producing. And once we gather data over several years, or however long it takes, so that we feel like we have a good, steady numbers, then we could actually set standards and diversion targets for that. Commercial participation enforcement, I mentioned that as one of the drivers. This one comes with a pretty high price tag, and most of the cost in that is not the outreach and enforcement to bring people into compliance. It's actually once you increase participation, you do a fantastic job of increasing diversion, but we know we saw those recycling processing costs were quite high. That's where these costs are coming in at. And then finally, consolidated commercial collection. Again, similar to consolidated residential collection, separating out service by sector is kind of industry standard. It makes things simple and it's more efficient. And so that's why it's a recommendation in the plan. There is a reduction here shown of 3 staff. Those staff would have been reassigned to the residential program, though, as part of these recommendations. As Craig mentioned at the very beginning, these recommendations are intertwined. It's really hard to separate out one from another. Some of them a little bit easier, but a lot of the big ones, they're mixed together. Okay, education and outreach recommendations. So here, the recommendation is to hire an education and outreach lead. So this would be a full-time employee that really is kind of focusing on marketing and may have a marketing background more than they have a solid waste background. That could have a mix. But the focus would be then to start an advertising campaign, start grassroots outreach, give support that we know is needed to increase our participation and move that needle on diversion. There is no diversion or greenhouse gas emissions listed here, and that's just simply because it's very hard to track as you're making programmatic changes at the same time. So these costs for these recommendations could be offset, some if the city were to join WARMA. Just again, that economy of scale, I know that you don't want to hear about. That is a possibility through materials. However, we recognize, though, that the city is distinct and unique, and we need to have focused education and dedicated staff to the solid waste programs. And so this recommendation remains in here regardless of what happens with WARMA. Okay, downtown area service recommendations. This is tied somewhat to the consolidated commercial collection, but it can be a standalone as well. Most certainly, the plan identified problems in the downtown, and we heard loud and clear from stakeholders that we need to improve service, and we don't disagree. One of those is mandatory Saturday and Sunday collection. Restaurants are busy, and they're busiest on the weekends. And so the carts in the alleys are the number of carts in the alleys are based on peak demand. And so if businesses aren't getting service on Sunday, then they're sized then for 2 days' worth of trash or recycling. We think that there's an opportunity, again, to get rid of some of the containers through that and also through consolidated container design, which means people sharing compactors and containers. And so I thought that was like my alarm, like, everybody stop, I have to stop talking. So through sharing containers, we make more room in the alley, again, because we want to encourage commercial organics collection, we've got to have space for the food waste. And then finally, the recommendation to procure a single downtown service provider. The downtown is unique, and it should be treated unique. There are service challenges in the downtown that don't exist elsewhere, and by procuring a single service provider, you could set up a model similar to what it has with the Biz, and really provide a higher level of service where the fees are more equitable and all businesses are paying in. That could happen in conjunction with or independent of a consolidated commercial collection contract. And then I'll touch real briefly on the diversion-related facilities. Crescent already mentioned. This plan specifically did not evaluate the drop-off station or the MRF, but it does support the recommendation to work collaboratively with the county at a regional level to replace the drop-off station, and also supports the city's efforts right now to procure an operator for the MRF. Funding recommendations, we've talked about the cost savings already that could be had if we consolidate residential collections. We've talked a lot about service fees. Other options are a millage increase, and I would view that in lieu of the consolidated collection option. The cost savings that you'll get from that should help cover the cost for most of the services that we're planning to recommend to implement. The third option there is a waste diversion surcharge, and this is either per household. It could be just in the residential sector, or it could be in the commercial and the residential sector. And it is really like a per-user charge to help offset some of the costs. So, for example, recycling processing we know is high, and this kind of would help to subsidize that. Okay, so the APTM took these recommendations to the advisory committee, and the feedback was there was a lot of support for most of the recommendations in the plan, including service expansion, service improvement, and education and outreach. There were 10 participants of the advisory committee that have voiced strong opposition to the recommendation for consolidated residential collection. And the reasons that they give for their opposition is because they feel that there's added value by the current contractor for that service, and concerns about the quality of the stream if we were to take that recycling collection with city staff. And then also the questioning of the validity of the cost-saving analysis, which Cress has touched on some. I will just show you one more slide on that to compare the cost of recycling collected from Recycling Ann Arbor versus the city. And you can see this is where we get that $775,000. It starts off at just over $1 million, but we've adjusted the cost downward, recognizing that when these numbers were put together, we had temporary labor performing some of the work. And so again, key component here is that we can't move forward with one recommendation without it impacting another recommendation. And so they are tied together, they're interrelated, and we need to think about that as we move forward. Consolidated residential collection, consolidated commercial collection, and year-round compost collection are all tied together. The last 3 bullets, commercial organics, procuring the single downtown service provider, and the mandatory Saturday, Sunday, could be rolled up again into that consolidated commercial collection. So, with that, I think I'll turn it back over to you to wrap up.
Just another couple slides under other activities. Again, we have 3 major contracts for this couple times that are expiring. First, the MRF operations and recyclables processing. That's currently contracted through Recycle Ann Arbor. Will be expiring end of this fiscal year, June 30th. Does have an option. All of these are set to expire June 30th, 2020, and do have an option for 1 year. But as Craig said at the beginning, there's lead time involved with trucks, but this one in particular, if we're going to have someone come in to re-equip the MRF, which is an option that's being sought and asked, that's got a lot of lead time too. So that, we do have an RFP actually on the street for that particular contract, and looking for those proposals to see if contractors can re-equip that MRF and get us back up processing. So the target for coming back, the proposals are due here actually next week on September 17th, and we're targeting coming back to City Council second meeting in October with a contract award recommendation. So I'll be hustling and working on an RFP here the next few weeks. Then we have two contracts, the franchise commercial waste collections with Waste Management and the recyclables cart collections for Recycling Arbor. And really, two contracts expiring at the same time, and really, as Molly put it, there's interrelations there. We need to replace those contracts, but we need to understand the direction given. How do we take these recommendations from this plan and move them forward to implementation? Because that direction is going to affect how we package these replacement contracts or contract, or replace them just in same old, same old. And so that's back to Craig's opening point. That's where timeliness is key. And then last, on staffing, provide a quick staffing update. Realized, folks may not have realized, but in FY18, we did add a brand new position in Molly Shop down at Public Works, an outreach and compliance specialist. May have heard Jenny Petoskey out working with commercial customers in particular, especially the downtown. She's gotten to know the alleys, so she's been with us since the spring of 2018. You folks, as part of last budget process for this fiscal year, did approve a new full-time position for enforcement that's going to be focused on solid waste enforcement, funded out of the solid waste, so that's already been done. And Public Services working with police and community standards to develop that position, get that up and rolling and staffed, and that enforcement focus going. We have a brand new position that's been crafted, new resource recovery manager. Some people may call it a solid waste manager, someone that's going to take over for me here and do what I've been doing the last few years. That is underway, and actually an offer's out, and I'll stop there because I don't want to jinx anything. But it's anticipated, hopefully, to have that person, that position filled here in the early fall. And then, just to wrap up, as Molly hit on, through the implementation of the shrimp recommendations, if they were put together as currently recommended, we'd be looking at a net of 4 additional solid waste driver positions down at Public Works. Up to 3 potentially, though that might be a little heavy. I'm sure we would probably phase that in, but on the customer service side of things, and then a new education and outreach lead position. So with that,
Thank you.
apologize for the length. but a
No,
lot
it's
of
important
material.
stuff.
So
Thank you.
questions and
Since
discussion.
it's 9 o'clock, let me propose that we limit our conversation here to half an hour, and then we have public comment after that. Everybody happy with that or content? Councilmember Nelson?
I just have a handful of questions. So I have questions about the financial model, like from slide 21, based on fiscal year 2018 costs, and then slide 29, the expenses that are sort of compared. I guess my question was, how did the lack of a functioning MRF impact these costs? If you're calculating, if your projected costs and your comparison is 2018, like how were our costs impacted by the MRF not functioning?
Well, let me see if I can, so to look at the pie chart, there's an item there for recycling processing. That would be an all-inclusive for that operation. So I guess the answer would be that those costs for transporting the material, we still have the cost for processing. So there's a cost for processing, and across the industry, costs from even probably 3 years ago, but even 2 years ago, are much different than costs today for processing. Not to get too into the weeds, but quality and cleanliness, if you will, is key, and that has really upped the cost of recycling everywhere. And so I think that's there regardless, whether we were still processing here or the MRF is in its current state. But there's, the transfer cost would be in there as well. So that's the piece there. So I suppose to try to get at what's the impact or effect, I guess the best way I can answer, unfortunately, is still out there just a bit, is now that we have an RFP out looking to procure what those prices are in the current market, that's where we'll be able to really see what the actual cost difference is, because we've made a focus on breaking down and having proposers lay out what those costs are for processing, for transport, and ask where are those items going so that we can try to reduce that greenhouse impacts and get things closer to home, and encourage and look for options to re-equip the MRF and get us processing here again.
But Crescent, does that have a difference in the collection cost? Because the comparison was collection to collection. If there, and it's uncertain, but if there is better recovery because somehow the materials are less contaminated, there's less transport costs, that would actually show up in savings in the MRF operation, which is a separate contract that's out for procurement now.
Yes, yes. So to Howard's point, and I think it might be easier, in terms of the collection costs, I go to this graph where the processing and the matter of the MRF situation, that red bar is, take that out of the game, if you will. That's that piece of it and where those costs are. Whereas the orange, the 2 gray, and the charcoal, that's the collections.
Okay. My other question is from slide 34, the rather dire analysis of decreasing fund balance. I was just curious, the adjustments that are bullet pointed at the bottom about capital assets, what year would it have been? What fiscal year would the MRF have been counted as a loss of a capital asset? Or has it been calculated as a loss in a capital asset yet at all?
We still have $6 million of depreciation on the MRF facility and the equipment remaining. So that's, we're taking that
okay.
piecemeal.
Okay,
So that's a
gotcha.
bit at a time.
All right.
Now, that could be a question, though, coming back if, not, again, maybe getting ahead of myself, but to plant the seed, if proposals to re-equip the MRF, depending on how the numbers come in, there could be a question that we need to answer. Do we take an adjustment for that undepreciated amount, which the equipment may be on the order of a couple of $1 million. So there may be some trade-off of, yeah, there may be someone looking to equip the MRF, but we may have a hit to that fund balance to write off that old equipment.
But the primary cost difference in that was the one-time write-off for OPEB funding, which was a pretty big hit to the fund.
Yeah, and that was FY18. Yeah.
The other, I mean, part of the solicitation for the MRF is so that the city's not in the position of having to put out a large capital outlay to re-equip and wind up with a fixed facility that may or may not be adaptable enough for future changes in the market. So that's kind of a risk-shedding approach where we don't have that risk. So at some point, that cost avoidance would offset the accelerated depreciation.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Reed?
Thank you. I actually have too many questions to ask you tonight, so I'll submit them later. But with regard to the slide that we're on right now, slide 34, that expense figure of $16 million, that includes the additional cost of shipping all of our recyclables to southern Ohio for sorting down there, right? And
That includes
approximately how much is that per month?
Actually, bear with me. If I brought the right spreadsheet, I'll see if I did. I'm not.
Well, Crescent's looking for that. There's still a cost to move material around, even if it was separated at a local MRF. So I think the
And-
conclusion that's being drawn is that it would be less costly, but there's still a cost
Yes.
associated with it.
And to directly answer the question, I'm unable to tell what the cost is for the transport because the contract as it's structured right now is a cost. So it's inclusive of transport, the operations at our MRF to transload, as well as the processing. So to directly answer the question, I'm unable to answer it. But that's something in the new RFP, we've asked for that broken out separately and specifically.
But clearly, this expense line is likely to decrease if we're not bundling materials and shipping them to be sorted elsewhere.
With the market the way it is and the standards that are imposed, I'm going to wait until the proposals come in.
So the contamination of materials occurs when you put it all in the same bin and then in the same truck. So that's where you have a problem with paper quality degrading and getting glass and mixed in with things. I think what's unknown is what the recovery is for different materials with the markets down, and they still have to be processed and sent somewhere. So it's a hard question to answer.
And so that leads me to my last question for this evening, and I'll submit other questions later. During this entire process, was there any discussion of abandoning our single stream recycling method for something that protects the materials that we're collecting from cross-contamination?
I have a recollection that there may have been some initial discussion, but I think the reaction, the response is people have become so used to single stream to try to go back to the dual stream, as well as even the capital cost of added containers and the equipment to collect it that way, it didn't advance. So there was probably, it was raised, but not for very long.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hayner, Lum, Rumlowy.
Thank you. And should my also list of questions be directed to Mr. Slotin? Okay, thank you. So, yeah, single stream. I remember thinking, wow, well, this is not a good idea, and I don't think it was. I'll get to the hot questions here. I had a question on slide, I'm sorry, it was slide 30. We were there a second ago. We talked about truck maintenance and truck rental and costs. So you're showing truck rental, truck R&M, and fuel costs. How come those aren't in the same stack? That's our cost for those trucks on the road.
Right, so the truck rental is a specific cost, so it's tracked separately. And so that's basically, I'll let Marty kick me when I misspeak, but the solid waste operation is paying or renting the truck from the fleet operation. So it's a specific line item and can be tracked separately. Also, there are times whether the fleet is aging, and we're experiencing that with the trucks that Recycle Ann Arbor is using, but also in our heavy leaf season and compost where we rent trucks. And so there's a true rental out on the market where we're leasing trucks for 2 months, 4 months for those high volumes. So that's an actual rental rate, so that's rolled in there too.
So if I was interested in, just for my own understanding of all this data, I mean, it would be fair to stack those two up and say that's the cost to float our fleet out there.
Correct.
Okay. I think it would look a lot different. Is there any truth to the rumor that I heard that we're having some maintenance issues? When we lease these trucks to others to operate, are they being returned for maintenance in a timely manner, the way we treat our own city fleets?
We're working with Recycle Ann Arbor. Go ahead.
Because I know that, I've been to the garage, and I know they have excellent software that returns these vehicles in, and they get them in there and they fix them.
We are working with Recycle Ann Arbor, trying to get them to comply with the maintenance schedules.
Okay, thank you. I guess I had two more things I'd just say quickly. Bulky items to me seems like it's kind of a student issue. When I was on the board of the thrift shop, we did textile collection, and we had a heck of a time getting paid for that. And it was fluctuated wildly with currency levels, with the overseas markets, with all kinds of things. And we did a complete waste audit of everything that we diverted that we couldn't sell. And we tracked our textiles to Africa and Asia and all different places. And it was a real dog for us. It was a real loser. And we had to come back and take offers and settle on our contracts constantly. because they just couldn't afford to come and get them anymore, and they'd build up in our facility. So I don't know how that got in there, but I'm not a fan of it. And then, the same thing, like, I would hope that some improved customer service is considered in these costs, because, say, like, when my my compost cart came down missing a wheel when I came home one day, and then they said, set it out Friday and we'll fix it. And I left it out there for 2 weeks and it never got fixed. I came back to the desk and they said, you can buy a new one for $25. And I said, well, you gonna bring it or what? And they said, no, and you gotta get rid of the old one yourself, bulky item. And I thought, that's not the kind of customer service my solid waste millage should be supporting. And so I share that because I've had many residents with similar concerns. What's a waste division surcharge based on? By the pound? What's the potential for calculating that surcharge? And I'll take the rest of my questions offline, but I saw that one kind of stuck out to me. That I know as part of our consideration for revenue, and I just wondered what that might be based on. Because I know some years ago, we were floating the idea of paying by the pound, which isn't super popular.
You're talking within the funding options,
Yeah, you had
waste diversion
various
surcharge.
funding options
Yeah.
stretching out
Yeah.
over the cost
It
of
would-
implementing?
That would be across the properties within the community, so it's an additional charge, but it would be done. Key piece to that, just that Molly didn't have time to get into it, is that's something that Epton found in the community benchmarking, that there's communities in the nation that have gone that way to have the diversion surcharge. We would first have to see, first part of that effort, is there enabling legislation in the state of Michigan for us even to do that? Because we're collecting the solid waste revenue, it's in essence another charge on properties. So we would have to even see, are we able to do that? And that's the first part of that step, to see if that's an option, so.
Okay, thank you. It sounds very unpopular. Yeah, I wouldn't like it.
It's a fee.
Yeah, it's a fee. Okay, thank you. I'll put my rest in writing.
Councilor Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll submit my questions too, so I'll just quickly ask a couple, but first I just want to thank you. I think the study is excellent. It's really one of the best reports I can recall seeing. And
Thank you.
so, thank you for all the work that went into this. Again, it's very well done. It's comprehensive. The data, the analysis are exceedingly well done, especially the financial modeling, the cost of service analysis are thorough, insightful, and presented in an easy-to-understand manner. So thank you. I think the recommendations are reasonable, focused, well thought out. We have important decisions to make, as you said at the outset, and the models and the data will be invaluable tools for us to inform those decisions. So thank you very much. I will also just say I support the approach taken here of identifying cost savings and efficiencies as a first means of funding the desired added services. And obviously, the savings are dramatic potentially. $775,000 on residential collections, $660,000 annually on commercial. So that's over $1.4 million annually on total cost savings. So that goes a very long way towards funding the desired new services folks have identified they'd like to see, and the Saturday and Sunday collection services downtown that are obviously necessary to address those issues. Yes, also nice, we've structured the contracts to all expire next June, so we can make a clean break and take full advantage of the cost savings in collections. So that's good planning by staff and appreciate, so thank you for that as well. Guess I can't help but make a comment on the Headley override recommendations. I'm not surprised to see that. So this proposal to have a Headley override in the solid waste millage and a new user fee, something I would never support. No surprise there, I guess. My suggestion would be that before we consider, layering on another $5 million in annual costs for our residents, it's $3 million for the override, $2 million for this new fee, that we generate the savings of the collection consolidation and implement those new services we believe are priorities and funded by those savings. So my comments, 2 questions, I'll send the others in. So on this slide 46, you noted that despite the $775K, thank you, Crescent, in annual savings, there was opposition, no surprise, to consolidating residential collection based on, quote, purported added value provided by the current contractor, end quote, questioning the validity of the cost-saving analysis, end quote. So given that the cart collection methods are the same, it's not clear to me what that added value might be, and the cost savings calculations seem very straightforward. So, I don't know, can you speak to those 2 concerns further? No?
Anytime you compare 2 different means of collection, the challenge is to make sure you do a side-by-side comparison and not wind up with, I think, something you had quoted as a oranges to grapefruits analysis. So I think we have done a very good job of aligning the costs. Some of the question there is the cost of overhead, and I would say that our overhead costs are not linear. You know, it doesn't cost us any more in supervision to hire more staff than what we have now. It doesn't cost us any more to manage a couple more contracts than we have now. So there was some concern about the allocation of overhead, as I remember the conversation. So that's really the second bullet. The first bullet really dealt with things that the current provider has stated that they do beyond collection. When we talked to the Environmental Commission, the point was that the current contract is a combination of fixed price and fixed unit price. We don't look behind the curtain as to where that money goes. It's just what we pay out on the invoice. So there was some representation that there additional value that was added by that provider, as opposed to, and if that was gone, it would wind up with a diminution of the recycling program. That's the way it was stated. But as we said, it's collection contract. It's a fixed price. We don't see how the
Right.
money goes once we pay the bill.
Okay, thanks. Then just lastly, and I'll send in the questions, slide 50, this is about the RFP, and you said that the responses are due September 17th, and the contract award recommendation is targeted for October 21st. So I'll just say I'm pleased we're conducting a competitive bidding process rather than just simply awarding a long-term contract based on an unsolicited proposal. Can you very quickly just, or maybe not so quickly, if you could provide us some information in the interim on the specific scope, deliverables, the duration specified in the RFP, or can you?
It'd be simple enough to just, I could provide a link or
Okay.
the PDF document.
Okay, and then also, do we have a sense at this point who may be submitting proposals?
I don't know that we should answer that even if we
Okay.
could, but I would just go back, and there was, members of the Environmental Commission did review the RFP, and they were
Correct.
involved in that process.
Okay, but again, if you can provide us the link, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Actually, I'll still forward it and work through Sarah to it, but if those that can remember, on the purchasing website, the city website, and go to RFPs,
Yeah.
it's right
Can you
there.
just do, okay.
Yep,
Yeah, I'm
but-
just
but I'll
looking
work
for
with
the-
Sarah to get that out to.
Some
to the
general
mayor.
information about the scope, again, the deliverables and the duration. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. It's gone long, and there's public that would like to comment too. Just on like slide 35, as we look at the commodities market for recycling, I would just wish that there was something with more time, 5-year, to be honest with you. It's a rather short glimpse in time to see what would happen with the commodities market, you know, what does happen over 5 or 10 years. I know this is probably hopefully a low point as states and regions do a little bit more homegrown processing and recycling for a secondary market. If I was an investor, I'd bet that line's going to be going up hopefully soon. So I'd just say that's kind of a short time frame to be looking at something as a global market. But I digress. Secondly, I want to go on about the education aspects. There's costs associated with staff's proposal of roughly $300,000 in outreach and education. Is that just tied to waste, or is that recycling? Are we going to get a component of, if recycling Ann Arbor was awarded, let's say, the contract for a much higher price, are we looking at some of those costs part of what they do for the additional fees they ask for? Is that education part of it?
So first, Councilmember, make sure this is a slide and the costs that you're referring to. I want to make
Correct.
sure I'm referencing the right. So what these costs represent, this is still in terms of education and outreach specifically. We do have some contracts with the Ecology Center, a different entity. Those contracts still remain in place, similar to, I forget which aspect Molly mentioned, but these are additional items to further augment and move us forward in education and outreach. So these costs here are actually staffing costs in the first for that new position. The second would be a cost to specifically bring in an outside marketing, advertising company to help us and develop that campaign and material. So those are specific costs to that. But those education outreach items that the Ecology Center does as a specific contract are still in place and there. But as far as, if I understood the question right, any educational items in the Recycle Ann Arbor and the collection contract, is it?
Yeah.
Again, back to Administrator Lazarus's point, those, whatever those may be, that's in that other contract. We don't know what those may be, what those are, if they're there. And so those are tied to that other contract.
To be more blunt, we are not contracting with Recycle Ann Arbor for any of those educational services. Our contract is for collection.
Okay. And then, on the bulky item pickup, is that a fee-based service, when we talk about bulky? So,
Yes,
that
that's what
kind
we
of
envision.
adds on, we talk about Sunday pickups in the alleys, we talk about some of the organic collection, all these services, these are all fee-based.
Yes, so point of clarification, and Molly hit it, but what's listed on the slides are the costs to implement those items, but those that could have services that are to specific parties, so to take the bulky waste as a good example, that wouldn't be an item, a program that we would spread across the whole community and everybody pay for, because not everybody's going to use that. And so that would be a for-fee service, and so that, we would look to recover that cost and have it be a net zero through those fees.
Okay, thank you.
Kristen, could you just add, though, on the cost for outreach, that was based upon comparison to high-performing peer cities and some of the
Yes.
programs that they have, and because of those programs, you're able to increase their diversion rates.
Yes.
If you confirm
And
that.
particularly, yeah, really, those recommendations came from that. And what sticks in my mind in particular, that the grassroots outreach, San Francisco in particular, I believe there were others, but that's the one that sticks in my mind as their method to do that, where they actually are down to that neighborhood level through their organization to do that.
Further questions, discussion? Thank you.
Thank you.
We now come to public comment, general time. Public comment, general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment, general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at public comment? There's no need to raise your hand, just queue up.
Good evening. I'm Nancy Stone. I live in the 5th Ward, and for 23 years I served you as Solid Waste Education Coordinator for the City of Ann Arbor. And I currently volunteer with the Washtenaw County Solid Waste Plan Implementation Committee. Today I'm speaking on behalf of several representatives from organizations and businesses who participated in the recent Solid Waste Plan update process. We emailed you a letter, and we outlined several concerns in the draft plan. And let us look at just one item, and this is one that Jane asked about. Our primary concern is the idea that the city can save significant amounts of money by dividing the city's trash, recycling, and composting pickups between just 2 providers, one for all residential and the other for all commercial routes. The driving assumption here is that recycling and trash collections will be paying and cost the same amount of money in the future. And this isn't accurate because we need to look at how recycling collection is intrinsically different than what goes on for solid waste collection. The analysis does not take into account that nearly half of Ann Arbor's recycling collections are in multifamily or mixed business areas. So most large complexes for apartments, condominiums, and businesses use several scattered wooden enclosures to hold multiple recycling carts. The driver of a recycling truck has to go out and retrieve those carts from the corrals to bring them to the truck. All-day recycling drivers move many carts from corrals, and that takes much more time than the city's refuse collection, which is mostly automated, as we're familiar with the curbside carts that are side-loaded or the trash dumpsters that are front-load automated. Recycle Ann Arbor drivers also take time to leave informational tags when they see contamination, and this improves the quality and value of the city's recyclables. What might be out of compliance is circled here, and the full information is given on the other side. So, to sum, it's critical to evaluate future contracts for recycling collection costs by using an easy, transparent approach. To accomplish this, please direct city staff to issue collection RFPs that require a breakdown for collection costs in detail, both for the residential and business sectors by all applicants. This way, you, City Council, city staff, and the public will be able to clearly compare the cost and service levels and make the best decisions for our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sandra Andrade from the Main Street Area Association. I'm representing the 4 districts. And really, I'm just reiterating, we sent a letter to you all this morning that I hope you'll take the time to read. But the big thing is that we feel strongly that we need more stake in what goes on moving forward with the downtown. Service on Sunday is not a new thing we've been asking for. That needed to happen a long time ago. And there's a lot of things in the recommendations that we agree with. We know they want to get there. We know that enforcement needs to be improved. They're on the same, the city is on the same page, but we really need to be at the table making these decisions moving forward because it's been a struggle. So anyway, I just want to reiterate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Nancy Schiffler. I live here in Ann Arbor. As the city is considering the plan for managing solid waste, it really needs to keep in mind what we're doing this for. We have a whole lot of sustainability goals in the city, long-term interest in a zero-waste culture, and, well, the new proposed plan includes a number of recommendations. I think there's some that actually run counter to those broader goals, and we should be assessing the proposed recommendations in terms of, are they really getting us towards those sustainability goals? Just as some examples, dividing the collection into service sector, separately for recyclables or combining everything in residential and everything in commercial. We should be looking at that value stream process to the extent that it improves on the quality of what we recycle and the marketability of it. Because if it's not doing the best job it can on that, then where are we with sustainability? Also, the plan is recommending funding new contracts for marketing the programs, rather than looking, I think, more carefully at the assets we already have that are able to do that marketing. Not just Recycle Ann Arbor, there are other entities in town, from Scrap Box to the Salvation Army and whatever else, and pulling those together, I think, is an important factor. The plan also pays kind of minimal attention to redeveloping the MRF as just sort of one possible item, and I think we're losing out on the local control over the quality of what we're putting into recycling. So I think it's important to maintain that. And then the plan's proposed waste diversion fee, all that's doing is discouraging diverting waste. And what we should be is encouraging doing that. So placing a fee on the waste diversion process doesn't make sense for our long-term goals. So as you review the plan, I encourage you to evaluate it through the lens of our sustainability goals. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Phil Tepley. I'm the Director of Technology, Commercialization, and Growth Services at Michigan Small Business Development Center, and I'm also a 15-year board member at Recycle Ann Arbor. I'm speaking on behalf of RAA tonight, summarizing a letter that we'd like to share from our board chair, Eric Head, who is unfortunately out of town tonight. We believe that the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan financial analysis inaccurately inflates the relative costs of Recycle Ann Arbor's curbside collection services. We assert that a correct analysis would conclude that insourcing the curbside collection services would save the city very little, if any, money. I would like to set the record straight and refer you to Eric's letter, which I'll pass out for more specific detail. First of all, the city, or the analysis neglects significant additional expenses of servicing, as someone had mentioned, Nancy has mentioned, the multifamily and commercial locations. The current RAA, or current service, we collect from over 2,500 locations each week, and the cost of collecting these sites is far more expensive than single-family sites, and the consolidation scenario projections do not take that into account. Further, most of these sites have multiple carts, just shy of 7,400 in total, and most of these are semi-automated, meaning the driver has to get out of the truck and to tip the cart, creating a higher labor cost per stop. Second, the analysis neglects significant additional management and education expenses that are currently performed by RAA, and they're not included in the consolidation scenario. Administrative costs, including data tracking and reporting, driver supervision and dispatch, and more, are included in RAA's contract cost, but they are not reflected in the projected city's cost. RAA's collection costs also include on-the-ground education and outreach, some of which is required by the contract, and has helped keep the quality of the city's recyclables high. And then third, the analysis compares a consolidation scenario with new vehicles versus RAA's current operations without those vehicles. The report assumes that other than for a standard escalator, our costs would remain unchanged in a future contract, but RAA would invest in new trucks and technology, and these investments would significantly lower future collection costs. So as you know, Recycle Ann Arbor is a nonprofit organization. Our board members volunteer our time to advance the mission to promote a circular economy. If RAA were truly costly, as costly as being portrayed, we would not even argue this case. It would fly in the face of our mission. Frankly, the only way to obtain an accurate cost of future curbside service is to seek competitive bids for that service. We'd welcome any transparent bidding process that compared actual costs, and we believe that such a process would reveal our operations are both cost-effective and mission-effective. So thank you.
Thank you.
If I may share.
To the clerk. She'll distribute.
Hi. My name's Kira Higgins. I'm here representing well-intentioned people of the community, specifically on behalf of the Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice, ICPJ, who see the climate crisis as a major threat as we need to act in all aspects of individual and community lives, obviously including engagement in waste. So with respect to the drafted solid waste plan, we really appreciate the inclusion of year-round residential composting in the plan. This is essential. This is an area which ICPJ has been directly involved in and sees as a significant step forward for the city. We hope that multifamily residences and commercial enterprises will soon have access to food waste composting as well. Of course, this doesn't happen overnight. We are particularly concerned about recycling. ICPJ was involved in the initiation of Ann Arbor's recycling program and again when the ballot campaign to fund and build the MRF took place. Recycling is a low-hanging fruit to implement for cost-effective, tangible ways to reduce carbon emissions. Ann Arbor has an impressive recycling program that has proven to recycle effectively regardless of the recent challenges for recyclers. It provides continuing education, crucial to making the process work, along with offering services such as the drop-off station, where you can recycle materials, including styrofoam. But yes, this already implemented service needs work and attention, which we would expect the solid waste plan to address. It appears to us that the plan has presented would likely do serious damage or even phase out Recycle Ann Arbor, which we think would be a major loss to the Ann Arbor community and to the effectiveness of recycling in Ann Arbor. It has taken dedication to keep the waste stream clean, educate customers, find markets for materials, you name it. It's not just trash collection and disposal. Recycle Ann Arbor is a name well-known, respected, and valued in the community for their dedication to proper recycling. The plan also lists major cost savings. As mentioned, there's significant concerns of how this figure was determined and concerns of accuracy. If it is an actual but smaller financial difference, we believe it is important to consider replacement hauler provides the same community value and quality for the costs at hand. As a separate related issue, redevelopment of the MRF by a group that is dedicated to recycling would save the city millions of dollars, not to mention the greenhouse gases currently spent trucking recyclables out of state, Southern Ohio, as mentioned. As you may know, Recycle Ann Arbor has developed a proposal to do this with external funding. We would encourage you to consider it, as it seems unlikely that the city or county will respond in the needed, timely manner. While money is an important factor in making decisions about Ann Arbor's waste, we hope you will make the city's commitment to a healthy climate an equally important priority as you consider we, as a community, can recycle and compost as much of our waste as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dan Ezekiel. I'm representing the Sierra Club's Huron Valley Group. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. My dad was on Ann Arbor City Council, so I understand something of the time and dedication it takes for you to represent us well. Ann Arbor was long a leader in innovative, mission-driven diversion of waste from the landfill, working in partnership with community-based nonprofits like Recycle Ann Arbor. We took our eye off the ball a little, and we haven't kept up with the opportunities that exist in today's world or the challenges. We've had a couple of huge problems created by mismanagement of Ann Arbor's solid waste system over the past 5 years, downtown trash collection and the MRF. The shrimp, thanks Crescent, barely addresses these important issues, and yet it proposes big changes to the part of our system, residential collection, that runs well and is supported by over 90% of the community. We have an opportunity to take leadership again, and here are 3 ways. First of all, the Huron Valley Group has already asked Council, to paraphrase the governor, to fix the damn MRF. either through RAAs or a similar proposal at no cost to the city. So it sounds like that may be going forward. We've asked council to join the county's regional waste authority without any more delay. And a high priority there would be to work with our neighbors on repairing or replacing our drop-off station before it, like the MRF, falls victim to neglect and disinvestment. And we'd also like council to step in assertively, including not accepting this report. It does have some parts that are acceptable, but as a whole, it's not okay. We should thank Aptum and let them go on their way. And please specifically reject the plan to consolidate collections as proposed. Instead, direct staff to explore consolidating service by material stream. Aptum, it's part of a large consulting firm primarily focused on the oil and gas industry. Like many corporate waste players, they see recyclables as being like trash, another cart or dumpster to get rid of at the lowest cost. Recycling is the problem to be solved. This is the same type of thinking that helped degrade the quality of U.S. recycling streams so much that the Chinese told us to stop sending our so-called recyclables. And our Arborites tend to see recyclables as a resource and wasting resources and throwing them in the landfills as a problem. This report seems to be straight off the rack, the same report they would have made for Ashtabula. We'd like you to take a close look at all the assumptions here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for the time. I'm actually not here to talk about waste. I'm here on behalf of Ken Bryant, who's there in the back, and he is a medical marijuana provisioning center owner here in Ann Arbor. And one of the things that happened when the ordinance was passed is with the 28 SEUs, it kind of created 28 lottery tickets. And one of the things that happened to him is his building owner realized that, his property is now worth a lot more money and has squeezed him out. I realize that's not your problem, and I'm not here to ask for for the 29th SEU, but what I would like to ask you to consider is the people that are moving through the queue right now. I count 26 permits issued with 2 out under review. The first one has been under review for over a year. It's been kicked out of planning 3 times. The second one, it's taken 15 months. It has not been issued, and on May 19th, it was written a letter or a no activity memo and has yet to respond. Thanks to your wonderful online system, you can kind of track these. So what I would like to ask you to potentially do is maybe set some sort of mechanism for a time frame for how long that these permits can go before somebody else in the queue can get a chance. I'm asking this because Ken, he happens to be next in the queue and is ready to go, and by all accounts, of the 26 that have been issued, they take between 5 and 7 months normally to be issued. So over a year and 15 months seems a little bit excessive. So if you could maybe push these 2 forward or kick them out for another person to maybe get a chance, or just consider something along those lines, that would be great. So appreciate the time. Everybody have a good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Karen Prochnow, and I'm an environmental consultant, and I'm also a local Ann Arbor resident and a mom. I just wanted to briefly talk tonight about the MRF and getting that up and running again. I think it goes a long way to decreasing our educational costs for recycling in the community. We can run school groups through there again and really do a good job of educating our populace and getting our recycling stream of better quality. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Ian Robinson, resident, Ward 4, president of Huron Valley Area Labor Federation. And I'd like to look at this from more of a labor perspective. Of course, this is environmental work, but there's always a labor dimension to everything that we do, and particularly as a public entity, I think we have a responsibility to do our part to reverse the trends of privatization and contracting out and going with non-union labor that have cumulatively generated the growing economic disparities in our country. We can try to put pressure on private corporations to do that sort of thing, and we do, but we need to have our public entities and the elected officials who we put in power in order to make decisions on behalf of those play their part in this as well. The proposal that's being put forward by the administration would take a system which has 3 entities, 2 of which have unionized workforces, eliminate one of those 2 unionized workforces by completely taking Recycle Ann Arbor out of the picture, and probably replace it with Waste Management or an entity like Waste Management that very likely has no union workforce. And if it is Waste Management, has a long and well-deserved reputation as an anti-labor organization that spends millions of dollars to fight unionization and to fight the actual realization and protection of workers' rights. So I think this entity needs to look at an alternative proposal that's been developed by labor and by environmental people, some of which has already been spoken to. It would, instead of dividing the streams in the way that have been discussed by the presenters of the administration's proposal, instead it would concentrate all recycling in the Recycle Ann Arbor under their umbrella, and all non-recycling, all solid waste under the city, as most of it currently is. That would ensure that we have the simplification. We have 2 quite different waste streams. 1 entity is responsible for each. That's an efficiency in the sense of getting rid of 1 of 3 entities that are currently involved in this system. It guarantees that the work will be done by organized labor, by people who are represented by labor, who are paid a decent union wage. And I think we should do this at the city level first, and then once we have a model that works in this way, see if we can't generalize it to the rest of the county, rather than entering into a regional body in which we'll be outvoted on matters like, should we employ union labor? Maybe it'll cost a little bit more. Maybe that's part of what it takes to create a just society, is to pay a little bit more for those services. I don't want to see a situation where most of the votes in this county are represented by the city of Ann Arbor are represented by 1 vote at the table. And I don't think Chris's response to that is really an adequate one. I don't know why the thing went off just as I mentioned you, Chris, but you know, yes, we can threaten to withdraw. Yes, we can say we won't sign a contract. But why don't we stand for the principle of democracy, for 1 person, 1 vote, going in and set up this darned organization in that spirit?
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment?
Good evening. Eric Lipson, I'm a 4th Ward resident, and 21 years ago, I was the 2nd reuse manager at Recycle Ann Arbor. During that period of time, we went from $150 a day revenue to $1,000 a day revenue over a period of 2 years. Recycle Ann Arbor is one of the foremost recycling organizations in the nation. Everyone gives a lot of lip service, and I'm sure all of the people on this city council do too. You know the expression buy local or buy local. If we don't support our local organizations, which have been doing the job for 40 years without a hitch, what good are we as people? We have people who have been working for Recycle for 20 years. I talked just to Brian, the director of Recycle, who returned my call. He didn't know who I was, and we talked about his proposal. And one of the things he said was, when I said, you know, venture capitalists, when they're looking at who to bet on, the idea is 20%, and the people to carry it out are 80%. Recycle Ann Arbor has, as when Brian said to me when I was talking to him, he said, you know, we have a deep bench. And that's right, because that's what they do. Zero waste, circular economy, union labor, local fair wage jobs. Aptum, as Mr. Ezekiel pointed out, was, I believe, the high bidder for some reason, was given this high-priced consulting job. I think it's a work of fiction, I'm afraid. It is so complicated, and all of the criticisms that we've heard, to me, of the analysis are valid. Who are you going to bet on? If this was your money, and it is your money, who are you going to bet on? Are you going to bet on the people who sunk the MRF through lack of proper organization, proper administration, proper oversight? Or are you going to side with the people who for 40 years have been supplying this community with services unparalleled anywhere else in the nation in many ways? They have been innovators. And currently, the current director of Recycle Ann Arbor, the executive director, has 35 years in the recycling industry. He just pulled Tim Brownell, who is a recycling genius, who was the director of Recycle Ann Arbor 20 years ago, back onto the board. I think all the points that have been made here are valid. I think that the financial analysis is basically fiction. Oh, we're going to hire now. We've got somebody we're going to hire. Bring him right in. He's going to start up and be the new director of solid waste management. I don't buy it. Let's go with the people we know who've been doing the job. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment? Seeing no one, public comment is closed. May I have a motion to adjourn, please? Moved by Councilor Lum, seconded by Councilor Eaton. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned.